This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still have a hard time talking about what happened back in 2012. I was just 10 years old when my family moved to this small town in Ohio because of my dad's new job. Starting at a new elementary school in the middle of the year was terrifying. I was this shy kid with glasses and braces who just wanted to blend into the wall. The first few weeks were awful. I ate lunch alone and spent recess walking around the perimeter of the playground, pretending I was doing something important. Then I met Maria. She noticed me sitting alone on the bus one morning and plopped down next to me. Maria wasn't like the other girls in our grade. She had this wild dark hair she never brushed and wore the same 3 t-shirts on rotation. But she had this confidence I desperately wanted. She didn't care what anyone thought of her, which was kind of amazing to me. "You're new," she said, not a question. "Want to be friends?" Just like that, I had a best friend. We sat together on the bus, paired up for projects, and suddenly I wasn't invisible anymore. Maria introduced me to her small group of friends, and for the first time since moving, I felt like I belonged somewhere. About 2 weeks into our friendship, Maria started bringing this blue binder to school. It had these little butterfly stickers all over it, which seemed normal enough. One morning on the bus, she nudged me with her elbow and whispered, "Want to see something cool?" She opened the binder, and I remember my stomach dropping. Inside were dozens of printed images of My Little Pony characters, but not the cute versions from the show. These were mutilated, bloody, dismembered. Some had their eyes gouged out or their bodies cut open with their insides spilling out. Some looked like they'd been skinned, all drawn in this sickening detail. "Aren't they awesome?" Maria was grinning at me. "I found them online. This artist makes tons of these." I nodded weakly, not wanting to seem uncool. "Yeah, they're interesting. I'm learning to draw like this," she said proudly. "Look." She flipped to some pages in the back where she'd attempted her own versions. They weren't as detailed, but were just as disturbing. One showed a pony with its head half severed, blood spurting everywhere. I remember feeling cold all over but forcing a smile. "You're really good at drawing," I said, which seemed to please her. She snapped the binder shut when the bus stopped at school. "Don't tell anyone about my art," she said. "They wouldn't understand. That's why you're my best friend. You get me." I didn't get her at all, but I was desperate to keep my only friend. A few weeks later, Maria got asked out by this boy named Ethan in our class. Elementary school relationships were just silly things. Basically just saying you're boyfriend and girlfriend and maybe sitting together at lunch. But Maria took it super seriously. She started drawing hearts with their initials and would talk about him constantly. Then, after about 2 weeks, Ethan broke up with her. He just told her during recess that he liked someone else. Normal 5th grade drama, except Maria's reaction wasn't normal at all. That day at lunch, she gathered her friends around a table in the corner of the cafeteria. I was there too, picking at my sandwich, while Maria talked in this intense, hushed voice. "We're going to get him back," she said, her eyes weirdly bright. "During afternoon recess, we're all going to spread out around the playground. When I give the signal, we'll surround him, grab him, and drag him behind the equipment shed." One of the other girls giggled nervously. "And then what?" Maria's face got really serious. "Then we beat him up, all of us together. He needs to learn what happens when you mess with me." Everyone got quiet. I felt sick. This wasn't normal kid stuff. She was actually planning to hurt him. "That's insane," I said before I could stop myself. "We can't do that. We'll get in huge trouble." Maria stared at me like I'd slapped her. The look in her eyes, I still get chills thinking about it. It was like something switched off behind them. "I thought you were my friend," she said flatly. "I am, but no. A real friend would help me. A real friend wouldn't call me insane." After that day, everything changed. Maria didn't sit with me on the bus anymore. She didn't talk to me in class. Instead, she started whispering whenever I walked by. I'd catch her and her friends looking at me and laughing. She'd knock my books off my desk accidentally or step on my feet under the table. The bullying got worse over the next few weeks. She'd leave notes in my desk saying things like, "Nobody likes you," and "You should move away again." She started a rumor that I wet the bed and that my family was poor. Just cruel, targeted things designed to isolate me completely. Then the scissors started disappearing from the art room. Our teacher, Mrs. Bennett, mentioned it one day, that several pairs of scissors had gone missing, and asked if anyone had accidentally taken them home. No one said anything. I didn't think much of it until a week later on the bus. I was sitting alone, staring out the window, when someone slid into the seat next to me. It was Maria. My heart started pounding immediately. She hadn't spoken to me in weeks except to insult me. "I miss being your friend," she said, sounding so normal and sincere that for a second I thought maybe things could go back to how they were. "Really?" I asked. She nodded, reaching into her backpack. "I got something to show you." She pulled out a pair of scissors, the big orange-handled kind from the art room. Before I could react, she had them open and was holding them uncomfortably close to my neck. Not touching me, but close enough that I could feel the cold metal near my skin. "Wouldn't it be funny," she whispered, "if the bus hit a bump right now?" My whole body froze. I couldn't breathe. The scissors were maybe half an inch from my throat. After what felt like forever, she laughed and pulled them away. "Your face. I'm just kidding, stupid. Learn to take a joke." She got up and moved back to her regular seat, leaving me shaking. I didn't tell anyone. I was afraid no one would believe me, or worse, that they'd believe me, but Maria would find out I'd told on her. For the next few days, I pretended to be sick so I wouldn't have to go to school. My mom finally made me go back after I ran out of excuses. I avoided Maria as much as possible, always making sure I was within sight of a teacher. I started taking a different route to classes, sitting where she couldn't easily reach me, and waiting until the bus was almost full before getting on so she couldn't sit next to me. Then came the day that still gives me nightmares. It was a Thursday afternoon in May, almost the end of the school year. I got on the bus and sat in the front row, right behind the driver where I thought I'd be safe. The bus was noisy as usual, kids shouting and laughing. I had my head down, reading a book, when I felt someone watching me. I looked up and Maria was standing in the aisle, staring directly at me. She'd never sit in the front, so I was confused why she was there. Without breaking eye contact, she slowly unzipped her backpack. My blood went cold as she reached inside and pulled out a knife. Not scissors this time, a real knife, the kind adults use to cut meat. A big kitchen knife with a black handle. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me and smiled, running her finger along the blade. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just sat there, paralyzed with fear, as she continued staring at me with that smile. After a few seconds that felt like hours, she put the knife back in her bag and walked to the back of the bus. As soon as I got home, I broke down crying and told my parents everything. the binder with the gory pictures, the scissors, and now the knife. My mom called the school immediately, while my dad called the police. The next morning, the principal and a police officer met us at the school. They searched Maria's locker and backpack. They found the knife, 3 pairs of scissors from the art room, and that blue binder full of disturbing images. But what terrified me most was what they found on a piece of notebook paper, a list with my name at the top, followed by Ethan's, with the word first written next to mine in red marker. When they questioned Maria, she apparently admitted she was planning to teach me a lesson for not being a loyal friend and for calling her plan insane. She had been watching my routine for weeks, noting when I was alone and vulnerable. Maria was suspended for the rest of the school year. I heard from other kids that she was getting help somewhere. My parents didn't wait to see what would happen when she came back. We moved again that summer, and I started 6th grade at a new school in a different state. I'm 21 now, in college, and I still get anxious when someone sits too close to me on the bus. I still check behind shower curtains and under beds. I've never been able to watch My Little Pony or use orange-handled scissors. Sometimes I wonder what Maria is doing now. Is she better? Did she get the help she needed? Or did everyone just dismiss what happened as childhood drama until something worse happened? I'll never know. What scares me most, looking back, isn't just what could have happened to me. It's how quickly someone can change, or maybe reveal who they really were all along. It's how a lonely kid like me could ignore so many warning signs just to have a friend. And it's knowing that there are probably other Marias out there, showing all the signs of something dangerous brewing, with adults and friends who won't recognize the pattern until it's too late. Story 2. I still can't sleep right when I think about what happened that night. It's been 4 years, but I can recall every detail like it was yesterday. The doctors say I have PTSD, and I believe them. Some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, feeling those eyes on me. It started on a Friday in October when I was 17. My parents had to attend my aunt's birthday dinner about 2 hours away, but someone needed to stay behind to take care of our sheep. We lived on this isolated property in Nevada, about 40 minutes from the nearest town. Our closest neighbor was 3 miles down the dirt road. Since I was the oldest at 17, my parents left me in charge of my brothers, Matt, 15, and Jake, 13. We'd stayed home alone plenty of times before, so it wasn't a big deal. My dad told us they'd be back late, probably around 1 or 2 in the morning, and reminded us to feed the sheep and lock up the house. Everything was normal that afternoon. We did our chores, fed the animals, and made sure the sheep were secure in the corral. We had 4 dogs, Rex, Buddy, Lucy, and Max, who usually stayed outside and guarded the property. They were working dogs, not house pets, and they'd alert us if anything was wrong. After our parents left, we made frozen pizza and played video games. Around 9, I noticed the dogs were barking more than usual. Not their normal barking at coyotes or deer, but frantic, almost panicked barking. "What's up with the dogs?" Matt asked, pausing our game. "Probably just a coyote," I said, but something felt off. The barking was getting more intense. I went to the window and looked out. It was pitch black outside, and I couldn't see anything beyond our porch light. The barking suddenly stopped. That silence, it was worse than the barking. Our dogs never all went quiet at once like that. "Maybe they chased something off," Jake suggested, but he looked worried too. About 30 minutes later, Jake needed to use the bathroom. Our house was old, and the plumbing inside wasn't great, so we had an outhouse about 50 feet from the back door. None of us liked using it at night, but Jake couldn't hold it. "I'll go with you," I said, grabbing a flashlight. Matt decided to come too. The moment we stepped outside, I felt something was wrong. The air felt heavy and cold. Our dogs, usually rushing to greet us, were nowhere to be seen. The only sound was the wind rustling through the sagebrush. Jake hurried to the outhouse while Matt and I waited outside. I swept the flashlight beam across our property and stopped when it hit our old pickup truck parked near the barn. There was someone, or something, leaning against it. At first, I thought it was just shadows playing tricks on me, but when I focused the light, I saw it clearly. It was tall, way taller than any person I'd ever seen, maybe 7 feet at least. It was wearing dark clothes, but what made my blood run cold was its face. Chalk white, almost glowing in the darkness, with these burning red eyes that reflected the flashlight beam like an animal's. "Matt," I whispered, "do you see that?" He nodded, frozen beside me. The thing wasn't moving, just staring at us. Then Rex, our oldest dog, crept out from under the porch, growling. The thing turned its head toward Rex, moved with unnatural quickness, and kicked him. Not like a person would kick a dog, but with such force that Rex yelped and went flying several feet. The other dogs, who were hiding nearby, took off running into the darkness. The creature turned back to us, and I swear, even from that distance, I could feel its gaze like a physical weight. A smell hit me then, like rotting meat and something chemical I couldn't identify. My chest tightened like I couldn't get enough air. Jake came out of the outhouse, oblivious. "What are you guys looking at?" he asked, then followed our gaze. He saw it too and grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises. "Inside," I managed to say. "Now." We backed up slowly toward the house, not turning our backs on that thing. It didn't follow us, just watched with those burning eyes. Once inside, we locked every door and window. Jake was crying, Matt was pale as a sheet, and I was trying to stay calm while my heart threatened to pound out of my chest. "What the hell was that?" Matt kept asking. "I don't know," I said, "but we need to call Mom and Dad." I tried calling them, but of course there was no cell service. There never was at our house. The landline was working, but they wouldn't have their phones on during dinner anyway. We huddled in the living room, all the lights on, taking turns watching out the windows. Whatever was out there didn't come any closer to the house that night, but none of us slept. We just sat there, jumping at every creak and sound until morning came. When daylight finally arrived, I went outside to check on the dogs. Rex was limping badly, with a large bruise on his side. The other dogs were skittish, staying close to the house and growling at the slightest noise. None of them would go near the truck or the barn. Matt found the footprints. They circled the entire house, stopping at each window. They weren't normal footprints. Too large, oddly shaped, with what looked like only 4 toes. The stride length was impossible, at least 6 feet between steps. No human could walk like that. Worse was the corral. One section of thick wooden fence posts was splintered and broken outward, like something had smashed through it from the inside. Each post was at least 4 inches thick. It would take tremendous strength to break them like that. We counted the sheep and realized 5 were missing. Against my better judgment, I decided we needed to look for them. My dad would be furious if we lost that many sheep. We took the 4-wheeler, all 3 of us crammed on it, with me driving. None of us wanted to be alone. The dogs refused to come with us, which should have been our second warning. We found 2 sheep about a mile from the house, huddled under a rocky outcropping. They were trembling and wouldn't move, so we had to carry them back to the corral. The other 3 were still missing. We kept searching, following tracks into a small canyon about a half-mile from our property. That's when we saw it again. In broad daylight, it was even more wrong. It stood at the end of the canyon, partially hidden behind a juniper tree. It was tall, like before, but as we watched, it seemed to stretch even taller, its limbs extending at angles that weren't possible. Its face was still that sickly white, but now I could see its mouth, too wide, with teeth that looked metallic in the sunlight. Our 4-wheeler stalled. I tried restarting it, but nothing happened. The thing tilted its head, watching us, then took a step forward. Its movement was jerky, like stop-motion animation. The 4-wheeler suddenly roared to life, and I gunned it, turning us around so fast that Jake almost fell off. As we sped away, I glanced back and saw the thing running after us. Not running like a person, but moving in these impossible bounds, covering 20 feet in a single leap. We made it back to the house and found the remaining sheep had returned on their own. Some had deep scratches across their bodies, not like coyote marks. More like something with hands had grabbed them and left claw marks. We spent the rest of the day barricading the house. We pushed furniture against the doors, covered the windows, and gathered anything that could be used as a weapon. Dad's shotgun was locked in his safe, and none of us knew the combination. Night fell, and the dogs started barking again, more frantic than before. Then, like the previous night, they suddenly went silent. We turned off all the lights and sat in the dark living room listening. The first thump against the front door made us all jump. It wasn't a knock, it was something heavy hitting the door with force. It happened again and again in a steady rhythm. Then it stopped, replaced by a slow, deliberate scraping sound, like claws dragging across the wood. "It's testing the door," Matt whispered. Jake was silently crying beside me on the couch. I put my arm around him, trying to be brave, but I was terrified. The scraping continued for what felt like hours, moving from the front door to each window, then to the back door. I crawled to the front door and peered through a crack between the boards we'd nailed over the window. In the moonlight, I could see its silhouette, impossibly tall and thin, with those glowing red eyes. It was running its hand along the door frame, feeling for weaknesses. The wood began to splinter. Whatever it was strong enough to break through. I backed away, grabbing a kitchen knife. Matt had a baseball bat, and Jake was clutching a fireplace poker. We huddled in the center of the living room, facing the door. The splintering grew louder. I could see the door beginning to give way, small cracks appearing in the wood. One of its hands pushed through, gray-skinned with long fingers ending in what looked like black talons. And then, like a miracle, headlights swept across the yard. Our parents were home early. The creature disappeared from the door so quickly I almost thought I'd imagined it. We heard car doors slamming and our parents calling our names. "Don't come in," I shouted, running to the door. "There's something out there." But they were already on the porch. I yanked the furniture away from the door and let them in, slamming and locking it behind them. My dad looked at our barricades, at the weapons in our hands, at Jake's tear-streaked face. "What the hell happened here?" he demanded. We tried explaining, all talking at once. My dad grabbed his shotgun from the safe and went outside to look around, despite our begging him not to. My mom stayed with us, trying to calm us down. Dad came back a few minutes later, looking disturbed. "There's something out by the barn," he said quietly. "Stay here." He went back out with his shotgun, and my mom's brother, who had driven them home, went with him. We watched from the window as they approached the barn, flashlights sweeping the darkness. It happened so fast. The creature dropped from the barn roof, landing between them. My uncle yelled and swung at it with a shovel he'd grabbed. The sound when he hit it was like metal scraping against rock. The creature moved with that same jerky, impossible speed, knocking my uncle down. Dad fired the shotgun, and the creature jerked back. It didn't fall or bleed, it just paused, then turned those red eyes on him. Dad fired again, and this time the creature leaped, not at him, but straight up, landing on top of our one-story house with a thud that shook the ceiling. We heard it scrambling across the roof, then silence. Dad and my uncle ran back inside. We spent the rest of the night in the living room, lights on, weapons ready, jumping at every sound. At first light, we packed what we could fit in our cars and left. Dad called a medicine man he knew from the nearby reservation. The old man came to meet us in town, listened to our story without surprise, and nodded. "Some things latch on to fear like a life source," he said. "The more afraid you are, the stronger they get." We never moved back. Dad and my uncle went to the property once more to get essential belongings, but they went armed and in daylight, and they didn't stay long. We still own the land, but the house sits empty. The sheep were sold, the dogs went to live with my uncle. I'm in college now, states away, but I still have nightmares about those red eyes and the smell of rot. Sometimes I wake up feeling like something is watching me through my window. The doctors say it's PTSD, but I know what I saw, and I know it's still there, waiting on our empty property, where the wind and darkness are its only companions. Story 3. I never talk about this. I'm only writing it down now because it's been bothering me for almost 3 decades, and maybe putting it out there will help me process what happened that day at Mount Rainier. I was 24 back in '95, working summer maintenance at the national park while finishing my forestry degree. July 18th was brutally hot that year. I remember sweating through my uniform by 10 in the morning while clearing brush near Paradise Lodge. My supervisor radioed around 4:30, asking me to check on a reported plumbing issue at the Longmire restrooms before ending my shift. I was annoyed because I was already thinking about grabbing a beer with the other seasonal workers, but that's the job. As I pulled into the Longmire parking area, I immediately noticed something was off. A small crowd had gathered around a tan Jeep Cherokee parked crookedly near the restroom building. The driver's door was wide open and the engine was still running. People were keeping their distance, pointing and whispering. I figured it was probably just some tourist who'd spotted a bear and jumped out with their camera. But as I approached, I saw the looks on people's faces. Something was wrong. A middle-aged guy in hiking shorts stopped me, recognizing my uniform. "There's blood," he said quietly. "A lot of blood, inside that Jeep." My first thought was maybe someone hit a deer and pulled over for help, but as I got closer, I realized this was different. The blood wasn't splattered like from an impact. It was smeared across the steering wheel, the dashboard, the driver's seat. Dark, half-dried streaks covered the inside of the door like someone had been desperately grabbing at it. The floor mat on the driver's side was soaked through dark crimson. I'd never seen anything like it outside of hunting season, and even then, not in a vehicle. The metallic smell hit me as soon as I approached. That unmistakable, sickening scent of fresh blood mixed with the summer heat. It made my stomach turn. I reached in to turn off the ignition, careful not to touch anything else. The keys had a single keychain, a small plastic picture frame with a faded photo of a younger woman hugging a child. I radioed my supervisor, who told me to secure the area until rangers arrived. While waiting, I asked the small crowd if anyone had seen the driver. A couple in matching Columbia jackets said they'd seen a woman walking toward the trailhead about 20 minutes earlier. The husband described her as disoriented and moving strangely. They thought she might have been drunk. She was holding her neck, the wife added. I almost asked if she needed help, but she wouldn't make eye contact. Her clothes were covered in blood, but we thought maybe she'd fallen or something. I felt cold despite the heat. The rangers arrived within 15 minutes and immediately began questioning witnesses. I showed them where the couple had seen the woman heading toward the Wonderland Trail. One of the rangers, Peterson, pulled me aside after looking at the Jeep. "This isn't good," he said quietly. "There's way too much blood in there for someone to be walking around. This is a serious medical emergency or worse." The Park Service called in search and rescue immediately. I volunteered to help since I knew the trails well. Within an hour, we had about 20 people organized into search teams with 2 dog units from the county sheriff's department. The dogs picked up a scent from an item in the Jeep, a sweater in the back seat, and we headed out just as the sun was starting to set behind the mountain. I was paired with a ranger named Martinez and a volunteer with a German shepherd trained for search and rescue. The dog led us about a mile up the trail before something strange happened. He suddenly stopped, hackles raised, and refused to continue. No amount of coaxing from his handler would get him moving forward again. He kept whining and backing up, which the handler said was completely out of character. "He's never done this before," she said, concerned. "Something's spooking him." We radioed the other teams, and bizarrely, the other dog was having the same reaction at a different section of the trail. Both animals seemed to hit an invisible wall they refused to cross. The handlers were baffled. As twilight set in, we continued on foot without the dogs. The forest got eerily quiet except for the crunch of pine needles under our boots. No birds, no insects, just silence. I'd spent hundreds of hours in these woods and never experienced them so still. It felt wrong, like the forest was holding its breath. About 2 miles in, Martinez spotted something on the trail, a single shoe, a woman's hiking boot, relatively new. About 20 feet further, we found its match. It was strange. They weren't placed like someone had taken them off while walking. One was upright in the middle of the trail, while the other was several yards away in the brush, as if thrown. We marked the location and continued searching until it got too dark to see. By then, the search coordinator had learned the identity of the Jeep's owner, Ramona Fay, 39, from Spanaway. Her sister had reported her missing earlier that day, saying Ramona had a history of schizophrenia and had cut herself before fleeing in her Jeep. That first night, we searched until nearly midnight before having to suspend until morning. I couldn't sleep when I got home. All I could think about was that woman wandering the wilderness with a serious injury. The blood in that Jeep, there was so much of it. How was she even still alive, let alone walking? I was back at first light. The search expanded, with helicopters scanning the ridges and more ground teams arriving from neighboring counties. The Park Service brought in thermal imaging equipment. We were all operating under the assumption that we were looking for someone who was either severely injured or already dead. What happened on the second day still haunts me. I was with a different team, pushing further up the trail past where we'd found the shoes. Around midday, we discovered a clearing where the ground was disturbed, not by animals, but in a way that suggested someone had been dragging themselves or something heavy across it. There was a small amount of blood on some ferns, but the truly unsettling thing was what we found hanging from a low branch nearby. A necklace with a small cross pendant, swinging slightly despite there being no breeze. It was perfectly placed at eye level, like someone had deliberately hung it there. The clearing itself felt wrong somehow, colder than the surrounding forest despite being in direct sunlight. Our team leader radioed it in, and evidence technicians arrived to document the scene. I overheard one of them say something that made my skin crawl. "The blood here doesn't match the patterns in the vehicle." When questioned further, he explained that the blood smears in the clearing appeared to be from different injuries than what they'd found in the Jeep. Different patterns, different splatter analysis. By day 3, the search had covered nearly 20 square miles of wilderness with no further signs of Ramona. It was as if she had simply vanished after leaving those few items behind. The dogs still refused to track past certain points on the trails, with handlers reporting they'd never seen behavior like it before. What I haven't told anyone until now is what I experienced on the afternoon of day 3. I'd been assigned to search a less traveled side trail that branches off about 3 miles from where the Jeep was found. I was with a volunteer firefighter named Chris, systematically checking the dense underbrush on either side of the path. We were about to turn back when we both noticed what looked like fresh scratch marks on a tree trunk about 7 feet up, too high for most wildlife and in a distinctly human pattern. 4 parallel lines, like someone had raked their fingers down the bark with incredible force. There were tiny dark flecks embedded in the grooves that looked horribly like fingernail fragments. Chris radioed it in while I examined the ground around the tree. That's when I noticed a faint trail leading off into a thicket of dense brush that wouldn't normally be passable, but something had pushed through recently, breaking branches and clearing a narrow path. Against my better judgment, I followed this makeshift trail for about 30 feet, having to crouch and squeeze between the tangled vegetation. It opened suddenly into a tiny clearing no bigger than a bedroom. In the center was a disturbing sight I'll never forget, a perfect circle of small stones, and in the middle, arranged with deliberate care, was a neat pile of bloody clothing, a tank top, jeans and undergarments, all soaked with dried blood, folded with impossible precision, not thrown or abandoned, but carefully arranged as if for some purpose. Next to the pile was a driver's license, Ramona's. The photo matched the description we'd been given. But what made me back away immediately was what had been done to the license. Both eyes in the photo had been meticulously scratched out. Before I could call for Chris, I heard a sound from the dense trees beyond the clearing, a wet, gurgling noise that might have been breathing or crying. I froze, listening. It came again, followed by what sounded like bare feet moving through undergrowth. But the rhythm was wrong, too quick, too irregular to be normal human walking. I'm not ashamed to admit I panicked. I called out for Chris and backed out of that clearing as fast as I could. By the time we returned with others, the pile of clothes was still there, but the license was gone. The search teams documented everything, but the dogs wouldn't enter the clearing. They sat at its edge, whimpering. The search continued for 11 more days before being scaled back and then finally suspended. Despite having dozens of experienced search and rescue, personnel, helicopters, thermal imaging, and tracking dogs, no trace of Ramona was ever found beyond those few items. No body, nothing to indicate what happened after she left her blood-soaked Jeep and wandered into the wilderness. The official report concluded that she likely succumbed to her self-inflicted wounds and that her remains were scattered by wildlife. But that doesn't explain the dog's behavior, or the bloody clothes folded in that circle of stones, or the scratched out eyes on her license. I quit my job at the park 2 weeks later. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever happened to Ramona in those woods was something beyond ordinary understanding. To this day, when I smell that particular scent of pine and soil that's unique to Mount Rainier, I remember the blood-soaked Jeep with its engine still running, and I wonder what really happened to Ramona Lynn Fay in the shadow of the mountain. Sometimes I still dream about that wet, gurgling sound in the trees, and in the dream, I don't run away. I step forward instead, and I see what made it, but I always wake up before I can remember what I saw. Perhaps that's a mercy. Story 4. I still get chills thinking about what happened that Christmas Eve 3 years ago. I was 17 at the time, just a regular high school kid living in Hill Country, Texas. The holidays were supposed to be about family and celebration, but for me, it turned into the most terrifying night of my life. It all started about 3 months before Christmas, when I broke up with my girlfriend, Jennifer. We'd been dating for almost a year, but things had gotten toxic. The final straw came when I discovered she'd stolen $900 from my savings, money I'd been putting aside from my part-time job at the grocery store. When I confronted her with proof, she didn't even deny it. Instead, she just stared at me with this cold look in her eyes and said, "This isn't over." At the time, I thought it was just typical breakup drama. People say stuff they don't mean when they're angry, right? I had no idea how serious she was. Fast forward to Christmas Eve. My family had this tradition of spending Christmas at my grandparents' vacation house about 3 hours away. It was usually non-negotiable that everyone went, but this year I had to work the day after Christmas, and my boss wouldn't give me the time off. So while my parents, sister, and our dog Max headed out that morning, I stayed behind. I wasn't too bummed about it. I figured I'd play some video games, eat junk food, and just chill. The day passed pretty uneventfully. I made myself a frozen pizza for dinner, played some Call of Duty, and texted with a few friends. Around 10:30, I decided to take a shower before going to bed. Our house is pretty big, 2 stories with my parents' master bedroom on the ground floor and my room upstairs. The shower in my bathroom has terrible water pressure, so I usually use my parents' bathroom downstairs when they're not home. I was in the middle of my shower, sometime around 11, when I heard it. A loud metallic banging sound coming from the direction of the garage. It was quick, just a couple of bangs, and then silence. My first thought was that something had fallen off a shelf in the garage. Maybe the cat knocked something over. We have this neighborhood stray that sometimes finds its way in. But then I remembered we'd closed the garage door before everyone left. I turned off the water and just stood there for a minute, dripping wet and listening. Nothing. Just the normal house sounds, the heater running, the faint hum of the refrigerator. I told myself I was being paranoid and finished my shower quickly. As I was drying off, I heard it again. That same metallic banging sound, but this time it seemed to be coming from the opposite side of the yard, maybe near the back fence. My heart started racing. I threw on my clothes without even drying off properly and went to my parents' bedroom, which has a window overlooking the backyard. I pulled back the curtain just enough to peek out, scanning the yard in the dim light from our porch lamp. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Our yard backed up to a wooded area, and in the dark, all the trees and bushes cast weird shadows. I was about to convince myself it was nothing when I saw movement near the shed. A figure dressed in all black was standing there, looking toward the house. I froze, my fingers gripping the curtain so hard my knuckles turned white. The person was just standing there, unnaturally still, like they were watching, waiting. Then they moved, reaching toward their waistband, and my mind immediately went to the worst place. They were grabbing a gun. I dropped the curtain and bolted. My dad kept a shotgun in their closet for home protection, and all I could think was that I needed to get to it before whoever was outside got to me. I was fumbling through the closet, pushing aside clothes and boxes when I remembered my dad had taken the gun with them because they were staying in a remote area. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely unlock my phone to call 911. As I was punching in the numbers, I heard the sound of glass shattering downstairs, probably from the kitchen door that leads to the backyard. They were inside. I whispered my address to the 911 operator, trying to keep my voice as quiet as possible while explaining that someone had broken into my house. She told me to find a secure room, barricade the door, and wait for police to arrive. The estimated response time was 15 minutes. 15 minutes. It might as well have been 15 hours. I quickly scanned my parents' room for anything I could use as a weapon. There was nothing except a heavy metal flashlight, which I grabbed. I pushed their dresser in front of the door, adding a chair wedged under the doorknob for good measure. Then I heard them. Footsteps. Not just one set, but two. They were moving through the kitchen, not even trying to be quiet. I could hear drawers being opened, things being knocked over. I retreated to the far corner of the room, crouching beside the bed with the flashlight clutched in my sweaty hand, and tried to control my breathing, which sounded deafeningly loud to my own ears. The footsteps came closer, moving down the hallway toward my parents' room. Then, the most terrifying moment of my life happened. A voice, a female voice I recognized instantly, called out from the other side of the door, "Merry Christmas, Tommy." It was Jennifer. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a random break-in. She had come for me, just like she promised. "We know you're in there," said a male voice I didn't recognize. "Open the door or we're coming in." I didn't respond. Maybe they weren't sure I was in there. Maybe they'd check the other rooms first. "Your car's in the driveway, dipshit," Jennifer said, her voice dripping with malice. "And we saw you looking out the window. Open the door." I heard them whispering to each other. Then the male voice said, "You stole from the wrong person, man. She wants her money back, plus interest." "I didn't steal anything," I finally responded, my voice cracking. "She took my money." Jennifer laughed, a sound that used to make me smile but now sent ice through my veins. "You think this is about money? This is about respect. You disrespected me. Now open the fucking door." I heard something metallic tapping against the door, probably a crowbar or some kind of pole. My barricade wouldn't hold against that for long. I was trapped in the corner, gripping that flashlight like it was going to save my life, silently praying for the police to hurry. The first hit against the door made me jump. The dresser shifted slightly. The second hit was harder, and I could hear the wood of the door starting to splinter. "I'm going to count to 3, the male voice said. "Then we're coming in. 1. Another hit, stronger this time. The dresser moved another inch. 2. I was preparing myself for whatever would happen when they got in. Would they beat me up? Worse? I had no idea what they were capable of. But then, the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. Police sirens in the distance, getting closer. Jennifer and her accomplice heard it too. Their reaction was immediate. "Shit," I heard the male voice say. Then to Jennifer, "We gotta go. Now." I heard them running back through the house, knocking things over in their haste. A door slammed, the front door, I think, and then silence except for the approaching sirens. I didn't move from my spot until I heard police officers announcing themselves at the front door. Even then, I was so terrified I could barely call out to let them know where I was. When they finally got to me, I was shaking so hard I couldn't stand up without help. The police searched the house and the surrounding area. They found signs of forced entry at the kitchen door and footprints leading away from the house toward the street. And the most chilling part? They caught Jennifer and her accomplice, some guy she'd started dating after our breakup, 2 blocks away, hiding in bushes. They had a crowbar, duct tape, and zip ties with them. The rest of the night was a blur of police reports and phone calls. My parents turned around immediately when they heard what happened, but it was still a 3-hour drive back. I spent those hours at the police station, giving my statement over and over, trying to process what had just happened. When my parents finally arrived, my mom couldn't stop crying and hugging me. My dad just kept saying he should never have left me alone, should have taken me with them no matter what. I found out later that Jennifer had been stalking me for weeks, watching my patterns, waiting for an opportunity. She knew my family would be gone for Christmas. She had planned everything. We moved away from hill country the following summer. I couldn't stand being in that house anymore, jumping at every sound, checking the locks obsessively. Jennifer and her boyfriend both went to juvenile detention, but the fear didn't go away with them. It's been 3 years, and I still have nightmares about that night. Sometimes I wake up thinking I hear that metallic banging sound, or Jennifer's voice saying, "Merry Christmas, Tommy," through the door. Christmas Eve has never felt the same. What should be a time of peace and joy is now a reminder of how quickly things can turn dangerous, how revenge can twist someone you thought you knew into something unrecognizable. I don't know why I'm sharing this now. Maybe because the holidays are coming up again, and the memories always get stronger this time of year. Maybe as a warning that when someone says, "This isn't over," sometimes they really mean it. Story 5. I've never told this story outside of therapy, and I've gone back and forth about whether to post it here. But after seeing other people share similar experiences, I think it might help me process what happened. This all took place about 7 years ago when I was 17. I ended up at Westlake Youth Detention Center after getting caught starting a fire in an abandoned warehouse. No one was hurt, but I'd been in trouble before, and the judge gave me 9 months. Looking back, I deserved it. I was angry and doing stupid shit without thinking about consequences. Westlake looked exactly like you'd expect. Concrete buildings surrounded by chain-link fences topped with razor wire. There were about 80 kids there, all between 14 and 18. Most were in for drugs, theft, or fighting. A few, like me, had done more serious stuff. For the first 4 months, I shared a room with this guy, Marcus. He was quiet, kept to himself, and we got along well enough. Then Marcus got released, and that's when Adam moved in. I'll never forget the day he arrived. I was lying on my bunk reading when the guard brought him in. He was probably 16, but looked younger, skinny with pale skin that looked like it had never seen the sun. His black hair hung in greasy strands around his face, and he had these dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in weeks. "This is your new roommate," the guard said. "Adam, this is Ryan." Adam didn't say anything, just stood there staring at me with these dull eyes. Something about him instantly made me uneasy, but I tried to be cool. "Hey," I said, "top bunk's yours." He nodded slightly and put his few belongings, some clothes and toiletries, in the small metal locker beside his bed. That was it. No photos, no letters, nothing personal. Our room was tiny, maybe 8 by 10 feet. Two metal bunks bolted to the wall, a sink with cracks running through the porcelain, and a toilet that always smelled no matter how much we cleaned it. There was a small window high up on the wall with thick glass that couldn't be opened. You could see a patch of sky and nothing else. That first night, I realized something was seriously wrong with Adam. After lights out, I was almost asleep when I heard it, whispering, soft but constant. I looked up and could make out Adam's silhouette in the darkness. He was sitting upright in his bunk, facing the wall, whispering nonstop. "Hey," I said. "You okay?" The whispering stopped immediately. "Yes," he said flatly. "Go to sleep." But as soon as I lay back down, the whispering started again. I couldn't make out what he was saying. It was too quiet and fast. It continued for at least an hour before I finally fell asleep. The next morning, Adam looked even more exhausted. I asked if he'd slept, and he just shrugged. As we got ready for breakfast, I noticed he didn't shower. This became a pattern. Adam rarely showered, and when staff forced him to, he'd stand under the water for the minimum required time but wouldn't use soap. His smell was awful. Not just normal teenage boy smell, but something deeper and more rotten. It clung to his clothes and bedding and filled our small room. I tried everything, stealing air freshener from the cleaning supplies, keeping the window part open when possible, washing my own sheets twice as often. Nothing helped, but the smell wasn't the worst part. It was the whispering. During the day, Adam was mostly silent around everyone else. In group activities, he'd sit alone, sometimes mumbling quietly to himself. The other kids noticed and kept their distance. But at night in our room, the whispering got worse. It would start as soon as the lights went out, soft at first, then more intense, sometimes becoming hissing sounds that made my skin crawl. After 3 weeks of hardly sleeping, I finally snapped. It was around 2 a.m, and Adam had been whispering for hours. "Dude, can you please shut up?" I said. "I'm trying to sleep." There was silence. Then something happened that still gives me nightmares. Adam turned toward me in this weird, unnatural way. Not like a person turning, but like a puppet being rotated by strings. His movements were jerky and wrong. "I'm not talking to myself," he said in a flat voice. "I'm talking to my little sister." I sat up, confused. "Your sister? Man, you can write letters during the day. People need to sleep." Adam stared at me with those empty eyes. "She's dead." I felt like someone had dropped ice down my back. I immediately felt guilty for being a jerk. "Oh shit, I'm sorry," I mumbled. "I didn't know." Adam made this sound, not quite a laugh, more like air being forced through his teeth. "You're the first person who's ever apologized to me for that." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to end the conversation and try to sleep, but something kept me talking. Maybe I thought if I let him talk about it, he'd stop whispering for the night. "What happened to her?" I asked. Adam shifted on his bunk and leaned forward. In the dim light coming through our window, his face looked like a skull with skin stretched over it. "I killed her," he said matter-of-factly. My whole body went cold. I thought he must be joking or trying to scare me, but his expression never changed. "What?" was all I could manage. "I was 5. She was 3. His voice was completely emotionless, like he was reading a grocery list. "We were having a bath together. I decided I didn't want a sister anymore." I wanted to tell him to stop, but I couldn't speak. Adam continued, his eyes never leaving mine. "She was always taking my toys. My parents always paid more attention to her because she was younger. That night, I pushed her head against the edge of the tub to stun her. Then I held her underwater until she stopped moving." The way he described it was horrifying, not because it was graphic, but because there was no emotion in his voice. No regret, no sadness, nothing. I watched her face underwater, he continued. Her eyes were wide open, staring up at me. Her mouth was open too, like she was screaming, but only bubbles came out. She scratched my arms with her little fingernails until she couldn't anymore. Then she went limp. Her hair floated around her head like seaweed. I felt sick. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My mom found us a few minutes later, Adam said. I told her Emma slipped and hit her head, that she went underwater, and I thought she was playing. I said I didn't realize she was drowning. He paused, picking at a loose thread on his blanket. They believed me. My parents couldn't imagine their son killing their daughter. The police didn't look into it much either. They thought it would be cruel to take away the only child my parents had left. So nothing happened to me. No punishment, nothing. My mouth was dry. "Do you regret it?" I asked, not sure I wanted to hear the answer. Adam looked up at me. "Yes," he said, "but not because I miss her or feel bad about what I did. I regret it because now she won't leave me alone." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" "Ever since she died, she follows me everywhere," he said. "At first I tried to ignore her, but when I ignore her, she changes. She gets taller, thinner. She stands over my bed at night with her mouth open in that same silent scream. So I talk to her. It keeps her happy, or at least it keeps her from changing." I looked around our small room, suddenly feeling like we weren't alone. Is she here now?" Adam nodded slowly and pointed toward the corner near our sink. "She's always here." I stared at the corner. There was nothing there but shadows, but suddenly the air felt heavier, colder. I swear the temperature in our room dropped 10 degrees. "You can't see her," Adam said. "Only I can, but sometimes people can feel her." I couldn't take any more. The next morning, I went straight to my counselor, Mr. Davies. I told him everything Adam had told me. At first he seemed skeptical, but something in my face must have convinced him I was serious. "I'll look into Adam's history," he said. "In the meantime, try to avoid engaging with these stories. Sometimes people make up disturbing things for attention." But 3 days later, Adam was transferred to another facility. Mr. Davies never told me why, just that it was for the best. When I pressed him, he said there had been concerns about Adam's psychological state and left it at that. I spent the rest of my sentence in blessed silence with no new roommate. When I was released 4 months later, I tried to put the whole experience behind me, but I still think about Adam. I wonder if what he told me was true or if he was just messing with me. I've searched online for news about a 3-year-old girl drowning in a bathtub accident, but without knowing Adam's last name or where he was from, I couldn't find anything specific. What bothers me most is that if his story was true, then Adam, a boy who drowned his sister and felt no remorse, is out there somewhere. He'd be in his 20s now, and sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if his sister is still with him, or if she's found someone else to haunt. Story 6. I'm still not sure if I should be writing this all down. Some wounds, even after decades, still feel raw when you poke at them. But maybe putting words to paper will help me make sense of it all. I've kept this burden for so long, I need to release it somewhere. My name is Elizabeth Talbot, Lizzie to most who knew me. I was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee in 1879, though that hardly matters now. What matters is what happened in the winter of 1901, when my life as I knew it shattered beyond repair. I married Henry Higgins when I was 19. He worked at Chattanooga Lumber, and back then he had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. He'd bring me wildflowers on random days, just because they reminded him of me. We weren't wealthy, but our little home on the edge of town felt like a palace because we filled it with laughter. 3 years into our marriage, everything changed. I still remember that Thursday in July like it was yesterday. The knock at the door. 2 men from the mill, hats in hand, telling me there'd been an accident. A log had slipped from the rigging and struck Henry in the head. They didn't know if he'd make it through the night. For 2 weeks, I barely left his bedside at the hospital. I prayed like I'd never prayed before, bargaining with God, promising anything if he'd just let Henry live. And he did. But the man who woke up wasn't the Henry I married. At first, the doctors called it personality changes from trauma. They said it might improve with time. I clung to that hope while Henry stared at me with vacant eyes that no longer lit up when I entered the room. I told myself it was temporary when he couldn't remember our favorite jokes or the names of our neighbors. But it wasn't temporary, and it wasn't just memory loss. 6 months after the accident, Henry started drinking. Not just an occasional whiskey like before, but bottles that disappeared in a night. He'd come home reeking of alcohol, his words slurring, his movements unpredictable. The first time he raised his voice at me, I was so shocked I couldn't speak. The Henry I knew had never even raised his voice to the stray dogs that sometimes got into our garden. "You're useless," he spat one night after I'd spent hours making his favorite stew. He flipped the table, sending the food crashing to the floor. I spent hours cleaning up the mess, tears streaming down my face, wondering where my husband had gone. I told myself it was the injury, that he couldn't help it, that underneath he was still the Henry who danced with me in our kitchen by candlelight. But a year after the accident, Henry lost his job at the mill. They tried to accommodate him, but his temper had become too volatile. That's when the real nightmare began. He'd disappear for days at a time. I'd hear whispers from neighbors about Henry being seen with men of questionable character, about thefts in nearby towns. When I asked him where he went, his eyes would darken in a way that made my stomach knot with fear. "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to, Lizzie," he'd say. Money started appearing, more than we'd ever had before. New clothes, a pocket watch made of real silver. I knew better than to ask where it came from. Sometimes he'd come home with bruised knuckles, and once with a knife wound he made me stitch up in silence. The first time he hit me was over breakfast. I don't even remember what I said that set him off. Just the sudden explosion of pain across my cheek and the taste of blood in my mouth. He apologized immediately, crying and begging forgiveness, swearing it would never happen again. It happened again 3 days later, and then again and again, until the apologies stopped coming altogether. I thought about leaving, but where would I go? My parents had passed years before. I had no siblings, and in Chattanooga, a woman alone had few options. So I stayed, walking on eggshells in my own home, learning to read Henry's moods like a sailor reads storm clouds, always looking for warning signs of the tempest to come. That winter, 1901, was bitterly cold. Henry had been gone for 4 days when he stumbled through the door past midnight. I was darning socks by the dying fire, and I knew the moment I saw his face that something terrible had happened. His eyes were wild, his clothes spattered with what looked like blood. "Pack a bag," he growled. "We're leaving town." "Henry, what have you done?" I whispered. That's when he told me about the robbery gone wrong, about the shopkeeper who wasn't supposed to be there, about how the man had recognized him. "I took care of it," Henry said, and the cold way he said those words made my blood freeze. This wasn't just theft anymore. This was murder. "I can't," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. "I can't go with you, Henry. This has to stop." I'll never forget the look on his face, like I was seeing the real him for the first time. Not the shell of my husband, not the injured man, but something darker that had perhaps been lurking beneath all along. What happened next is still a blur of pain and terror. Henry grabbed me by the hair, slamming my head against the wall so hard that stars exploded behind my eyes. I remember the warm trickle of blood down my neck, the room spinning as I collapsed to the floor. "You'll do as I say," he snarled, but I could barely hear him through the ringing in my ears. He left me there, bleeding on the floor, while he went to the bedroom to pack. I don't know where I found the strength, but somehow I pulled myself up. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand, but I knew with absolute certainty that if I left with Henry that night, I would not live to see spring. While he rummaged through our bedroom, I grabbed my mother's locket from where I kept it hidden beneath a loose floorboard. I stuffed it and what little money I had saved into my pocket, took my warmest shawl, and slipped out the back door into the frigid night. I walked for hours, the cold numbing the pain in my head. By dawn, I was at the train station, where I bought a ticket for the first train heading east, away from Chattanooga, away from Henry, away from the ruins of the life I once had. I ended up in Haw River, North Carolina. It was just a small mill town, but it felt safe simply because it wasn't Chattanooga. I found work sewing at a textile factory and rented a tiny room above the general store. For weeks, I jumped at every loud noise, certain Henry had found me. That's where I met Benjamin Heckler. He was the pastor of the small Baptist church, and he found me one Sunday morning sitting on a bench near the river, staring at the rushing water. I must have looked a sight, too thin, with circles under my eyes from nights spent unable to sleep. "You look like you could use a friend," he said, sitting down beside me but keeping a respectful distance. Something about his gentle manner broke through the wall I'd built around myself. Before I knew it, I was telling him everything. About Henry, about the accident that changed him, about my escape. I expected judgment for abandoning my husband, but instead, Benjamin listened with compassion in his eyes. "The church has a small room in the back," he said when I'd finished. "It's not much, but it's safe. You're welcome to stay there until you find your feet." I moved into that little room the next day. Benjamin never pushed or questioned, just offered quiet support. He helped me find better work as a seamstress for the town's wealthier families and introduced me to people who became friends. Slowly, I began to heal. I consulted a lawyer who helped me file for an annulment on grounds of extreme cruelty. It was granted in 1902, freeing me legally from Henry at last. Benjamin and I grew closer over that year. He was everything Henry had once been, and then some, kind, gentle, with a quiet strength that never turned to violence. When he proposed, I hesitated, haunted by the memory of how my first marriage had ended. But Benjamin was patient. "We can wait as long as you need," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." We married in the spring of 1903 in a small ceremony by the river. Our son Samuel was born that December, a beautiful baby with his father's thoughtful eyes. For 2 years, I knew a happiness deeper than any I'd felt before. I thought perhaps God had finally decided I'd suffered enough. I was wrong. It was a cool afternoon in September of 1905. Benjamin was at the church, and I was at home with Samuel, singing to him as I folded laundry. The knock at the door didn't alarm me. Neighbors often stopped by. But it wasn't a neighbor at the door. It was Henry, flanked by two rough-looking men I'd never seen before. He looked older, harder, his eyes bloodshot and full of rage. "Hello, Lizzie," he said, his voice sending ice through my veins. "Thought you could hide from me forever?" I tried to slam the door, but Henry forced it open, sending me stumbling backward. I clutched Samuel tightly to my chest, my mind racing. "You made a fool of me," Henry snarled, advancing into our home. "Running off, getting the marriage annulled, living here playing house with your preacher." "Please," I begged, backing away. "It's been years, Henry. We both moved on." "I didn't move on," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I spent years tracking you down, and now I'm going to take back what's mine." I don't know what would have happened next if Benjamin hadn't arrived home early. He took in the scene in an instant, me cornered with our son, Henry and his men advancing. "Lizzie, take Samuel and run," Benjamin said calmly, moving to stand between us and Henry. I saw he had his hunting rifle in his hands. What happened next is still a nightmare I relive in my darkest moments. I ran for the back door, Samuel wailing in my arms. Behind me, I heard shouting, then the deafening crack of the rifle. There was a scream, Henry's, followed by more gunshots. I didn't look back. I ran through our garden, through the woods behind our house. Samuel clutched tightly against me. His cries tore at my heart, but I couldn't stop. I knew with terrible certainty that Benjamin wasn't coming after us. I made it to Mrs. Patterson's house, our closest neighbor. Through gasping breaths, I told her to fetch the sheriff. Then I collapsed, holding Samuel so tightly he squirmed in protest. By nightfall, I knew the worst. Benjamin was gone, shot multiple times by Henry's men. Henry himself was wounded but alive. Benjamin's shot had hit him in the shoulder. The sheriff arrested Henry and his companions, but it didn't matter. My Benjamin was gone. I left Haw River that night. Mrs. Patterson gave me money and provisions, and I boarded a midnight train to Richmond, Virginia, with Samuel asleep in my arms. I couldn't stay in the town where Benjamin and I had been so happy, where every street corner would remind me of him. In Richmond, I found work at a garment factory and raised Samuel alone. He grew into a fine young man who looked so much like his father, it sometimes took my breath away. I never remarried. After Benjamin, it seemed impossible to love anyone else that way again. Henry went to prison for Benjamin's murder, though I later heard he died there of tuberculosis within a few years. I felt nothing when I got the news. No relief, no closure, just emptiness. I'm an old woman now. Samuel has children of his own, and they've given me grandbabies who bring light to my final years. Sometimes when I look at them, I see echoes of Benjamin's smile, and it's both a blessing and a knife to the heart. I've never told this story in full before today. Some burdens are too heavy to share, even with those you love most. But I'm tired of carrying it alone. I'm tired of the nightmares where I'm still running. Samuel in my arms, gunshots echoing behind me. I don't know why God led me down this path. I don't know why Henry had to be on that logging site at that exact moment, or why the rope had to snap just as he walked by. 1 second changed everything. 1 second turned my life into before and after. And here I am, still in the after, still wondering what might have been. Story 7. I still get chills thinking about what happened last month. I keep replaying everything in my head, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't reacted quickly enough. It was a Thursday night, and I had just finished my shift at the dental office where I work as a receptionist. It had been a particularly exhausting day. One of those where everything that could go wrong did. The computer system crashed twice, and we had 3 emergency patients squeezed in between appointments. By the time I left work, it was already after 8 in the evening, and all I wanted was to collapse on my couch with a glass of wine. But I had promised my best friend Jessica that I'd come see her new apartment in Riverdale. She'd been begging me for weeks to visit, and I kept putting it off because of my work schedule. That night was the only one that worked for both of us, so despite my exhaustion, I texted her that I was on my way. Jessica and I have been friends since high school, 15 years of friendship through breakups, job changes, and now her move to a new part of town. I hadn't been to Riverdale much before. It's not far from where I live, maybe 15 minutes without traffic, but it's just not an area I frequent. I plugged her address into my phone's GPS and started driving. The sky was already dark, and there was a light drizzle that made the streets shine under the streetlights. My car's heater was acting up, blowing lukewarm air that did little against the fall chill. I remember being irritated by that, which seems so trivial now. About 3 minutes into my drive, right as I was approaching the highway entrance, my phone suddenly went black. I picked it up, confused, and pressed the power button. The low battery symbol flashed briefly before disappearing again. Dead. Just completely dead. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered to myself. I always keep my car charger in my center console, but I had lent it to a coworker earlier that week and forgotten to get it back. Such a small, stupid thing that would end up putting me in danger. I considered turning around, but Jessica was expecting me, and I thought I remembered the general direction. I'd been to Riverdale a few times before. How hard could it be to find a major apartment complex? I was about 70% sure I knew which exit to take, so I decided to wing it. That was my first mistake. I drove for about 10 minutes, taking what I thought was the right exit, but the surroundings didn't look familiar. The streets got narrower, the buildings more spread out. I realized I had definitely missed my turn somewhere. After a few more random turns, hoping to find something recognizable, I admitted to myself that I was completely lost. The digital clock on my dashboard read 8:35. I didn't want Jessica to worry, so I decided to stop somewhere and ask for directions. Up ahead, I spotted the fluorescent glow of a gas station, one of those older places with just 4 pumps and a small convenience store. The sign above it read "Quick Stop" in flickering red letters. There were only 2 other cars parked there. I pulled in, parked near the entrance, and hurried inside. The bell above the door jingled as I entered. The store smelled like coffee and those hot dogs that sit on rollers for hours. A bored-looking teenage clerk was behind the counter, scrolling through his phone. He barely looked up when I approached. "Excuse me," I said. "Could you please tell me how to get to Riverside Apartments in Riverdale? I'm completely lost and my phone died." The clerk furrowed his brow. "Riverside? Not sure. I don't really know Riverdale that well. I just work here." I was about to ask if he had a map or if I could use the store phone when I heard a deep voice behind me. "Riverside Apartments? I know exactly where that is." I turned around to see a tall man standing a few feet away. He was bald with a patchy beard, wearing a dark green jacket. Something about him immediately made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way he was standing too close, or how his eyes seemed to be studying me rather than just looking at me. But I pushed the feeling aside, thinking I was just being paranoid after getting lost. "Oh, do you? That would be really helpful," I said, trying to sound grateful but keeping my distance. "Yeah, I live right by there," he said, smiling. His teeth were stained yellow. "Got a pen? I can write down directions for you." The clerk handed him a pen, and the man grabbed a gas station flyer from a stack near the register. He leaned against the counter and started writing, occasionally glancing up at me as he did. "It's actually pretty simple from here," he said, "but there are a couple tricky turns because of construction. Follow these exactly, and you'll be there in 5 minutes." He handed me the flyer. His handwriting was surprisingly neat, with numbered steps and even a small, crude map sketched at the bottom. I thanked him, feeling a bit more at ease. After all, he had gone through the trouble of drawing a map, and the clerk was right there watching. What could go wrong? "Thanks so much," I said, already backing toward the door. "I appreciate it." "No problem at all," he replied, still smiling that unsettling smile. "Drive safe." I hurried back to my car, locking the doors immediately after. Getting in, a habit I developed in college. The directions seemed straightforward enough. I was supposed to turn right out of the gas station, then take the second left onto Maple Street, followed by a right onto Orchard Road. After that, there were a few more turns to navigate around what he had marked as construction areas. I started following the directions, turning right out of the gas station and then taking the second left. So far, everything seemed legitimate. But after turning onto Orchard Road, I realized I was heading away from town rather than toward it. The streetlights became fewer and farther between, and soon there were dense woods on both sides of the road. A nervous feeling started growing in my stomach. I checked the time, 8:52. I'd been driving for about 7 minutes, and the man had said it would take 5 to reach the apartments. But there was no sign of any apartment complex, or even of the residential area I'd expect to see near one. Maybe he meant 5 minutes after all these detours, I thought, trying to calm myself down. I kept following the directions, taking a left onto a road called Cedar Lane. This road was narrower, with no center line painted on it. The trees seemed to close in on both sides, their branches forming a dark tunnel above. After another 3 minutes of driving, the directions instructed me to turn right onto Pine Trail. When I got there, I saw it wasn't even a proper road. It was a dirt path, barely wide enough for my car. By now, alarm bells were screaming in my head, but I was lost without my phone, and I had no idea how to get back to the main road. I slowed down at the turn, debating whether to continue following these increasingly suspicious directions. That's when I made my second mistake. Instead of turning around immediately, I decided to go just a little further to see if I could spot anything familiar, anything that would help me get my bearings. I turned onto the dirt road and drove slowly, my headlights cutting through the darkness between the trees. The final direction on the paper said, "At the end of Pine Trail, turn left into driveway. Apartments will be visible from there." But when I reached the end of the dirt path about 30 seconds later, what I saw wasn't an apartment complex. It was a single house, an old dark farmhouse set back from the road. There were no lights on inside, no other buildings nearby. Just one isolated house in the middle of the woods. My blood ran cold. This was obviously not Jessica's apartment complex. I had been deliberately misled, sent to this remote location for God knows what reason. My hands started trembling on the steering wheel as I realized the danger I was in. I stopped the car, not turning into the driveway, and was about to shift into reverse when headlights suddenly appeared in my rearview mirror. A car had pulled up behind me, blocking the narrow dirt road. My heart practically stopped when the driver's door opened and a figure emerged. Even in the darkness, I could tell it was the bald man from the gas station. He had followed me. The whole time he had been right behind me, watching me follow his directions straight into what was probably a trap. His trap. I froze for a split second. paralyzed by fear and disbelief. This couldn't be happening. The man started walking toward my car, moving quickly but deliberately. He was headed for my passenger side door, not the driver's side, which made everything even more terrifying. He wasn't coming to talk to me. He was trying to get in. Adrenaline finally kicked in. I slammed my car into reverse, cranked the wheel hard and floored it, driving half on the dirt road and half on the grass to get around his vehicle. My tires spun in the mud for a terrifying moment before finding traction. In my rearview mirror, I saw the man sprint back to his car. I managed to get back onto the dirt road and sped in reverse until I reached a spot wide enough to turn around. As soon as my car was facing the right direction, I slammed it into drive and floored it again, tearing down the dirt road as fast as I dared in the darkness. Behind me, I could see headlights. He was following me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheels straight as I flew down the dirt path, praying I wouldn't hit a tree or drive into a ditch. When I reached Cedar Lane, I turned sharply and sped up even more, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. I didn't know if he was still behind me. I was too scared to check my mirrors properly, just catching glimpses of darkness and occasional lights. I drove randomly, taking turns whenever I saw them, just trying to find a main road or another gas station, somewhere with people. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, I spotted the bright lights of another gas station up ahead. This one was bigger, part of a chain, with several cars parked outside. I pulled in and parked right in front of the entrance, where there were plenty of people and security cameras. I ran inside, looking behind me constantly, and asked to use their phone. The cashier must have seen how terrified I was because she immediately handed me her cell phone and asked if I was okay. I called Jessica first, who was worried sick. Then I called the police. While waiting for them to arrive, I bought a phone charger and plugged in my phone. As soon as it had enough power to turn on, I saw 6 missed calls from Jessica. When the police arrived, I gave them a description of the man and his car, as well as the directions he had written out. One officer stayed with me while another drove out to check the house at the end of Pine Trail. They later told me the property appeared abandoned, with no sign of recent habitation. The officer who took my statement said they'd had reports of similar incidents in neighboring counties, a man giving false directions to women traveling alone, though as far as they knew, no one had actually been attacked. They suspected he was either scouting potential victims or trying to lure women to rob them. Either way, they were taking it seriously. I finally made it to Jessica's apartment around 11 that night, escorted by a police officer. I spent the night there, too shaken to be alone. I couldn't sleep, just kept seeing the man's face and imagining what might have happened if I hadn't gotten away. It's been a month, and the police still haven't caught the guy. I've given additional statements and looked through mugshots, but nothing so far. I'm seeing a therapist to deal with the anxiety and have changed my routine completely. I don't work late anymore. I never drive anywhere without a fully charged phone and a car charger, and I've taken self-defense classes. The thing that haunts me most is how calculated it all was. He didn't just opportunistically follow me. He created a situation where I would be vulnerable, isolated, and heading straight to him. He knew exactly what he was doing. How many times had he done this before? How many women weren't as lucky as I was? I still can't drive at night without checking my rearview mirror constantly. I can't stop at gas stations without scanning for bald men in green jackets. And I absolutely cannot get the image out of my head of him walking toward my passenger door in the darkness, so confident that he had me exactly where he wanted me. Story 8. I still can't fully explain what happened to me last year. My hands shake when I think about it, but I need to share this. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar or can help me make sense of it all. I was one of those pandemic business success stories you hear about. After getting furloughed from my marketing job in spring of 2020, I started baking to cope with stress. First, it was just sourdough like everyone else, but then I branched out to pastries, pies, and these incredible cinnamon rolls my grandmother taught me to make. My mom suggested I sell them, so I posted some photos on neighborhood groups. Within weeks, I was waking up at 4 in the morning to fulfill orders. People in Boston were going crazy for my stuff. Something about homemade baked goods during lockdown just hit different. By fall, I had a legitimate home bakery business called Athena's Oven. I was making more money than at my corporate job and actually enjoying my work for once. Then last October 21st, 2021 to be exact, I woke up at 3 a.m. to my fire alarm blaring. The smoke was already seeping under my door. I only had time to grab my phone and slip on shoes before I had to get out. Standing on the sidewalk with my neighbors, watching flames consume our building, I can't describe how surreal it felt. By morning, everything I owned was gone. All my baking equipment, ingredients, personal stuff, everything. My mom lives in Somerville, about 20 minutes away, and she took me in immediately. I continued baking from her kitchen, but it was cramped and awkward. We kept bumping into each other, and I felt like I was imposing. Plus, my business was growing, and I needed more space. I started apartment hunting right away, but you know how Boston's rental market is. Impossible. After weeks of searching and finding nothing in my price range, I spotted this listing on Mount Vernon Street in Beacon Hill. It seemed too good to be true. 2 floors in a gorgeous brownstone with a full kitchen, at a price I could actually afford. The only weird thing was this note at the bottom about strict terms and conditions for potential tenants. I called the number immediately. A woman named Evelyn answered and explained the situation. The property belonged to her family, and her elderly cousin Ethel lived on the 3rd floor. Ethel had some rare medical condition that kept her confined to her rooms, and the new tenant would need to respect her privacy. The 1st and 2nd floors would be all mine, but the 3rd floor was completely off limits. When I went to view the place, I fell in love instantly. This classic brick facade with black shutters, an oak door with a brass knocker that gleamed in the sunlight. Inside was even better. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, built-in bookshelves, and the kitchen. Oh my God, the kitchen. White marble countertops, a 6-burner gas range, double ovens, and these gorgeous bay windows overlooking the street. For a baker, it was absolute heaven. I signed the lease that day. Evelyn seemed pleased. She was probably in her 50s, very put together with this perfect bob haircut and expensive-looking clothes. She mentioned again that Ethel needed absolute privacy due to her condition, but didn't elaborate. I was too excited about the kitchen to press for details. The first few weeks were amazing. I moved in just before Thanksgiving and immediately set up my baking operation. Orders poured in for holiday treats, and the new kitchen made everything easier. I barely registered Ethel's presence upstairs except for occasional footsteps and sometimes a rattling cough. I left baked goods at the bottom of the 3rd floor stairs occasionally, and they'd always disappear, though I never received any acknowledgement. It was around mid-December when things started changing. At first it was just fatigue, bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of coffee could fix. I chalked it up to holiday rush orders, but then I noticed my hair coming out in clumps when I showered. My fingernails became brittle and started breaking constantly. I lost weight even though I was eating normally. Then my period stopped completely. I tried to ignore these symptoms, thinking it was just stress, but things got worse. One day in January, a regular customer texted me a photo of one of my fingernails baked into their banana bread. I was mortified and immediately closed down for a winter break while I tried to figure out what was happening to me. My mom convinced me to see a doctor. The blood work showed anemia and some other deficiencies, but nothing that explained all my symptoms. The doctor suggested environmental factors, maybe mold or lead in the old building. She recommended I stay somewhere else for a few days to see if my symptoms improved. I went to my mom's for a weekend, and weirdly, I did feel better almost immediately. I had more energy and the constant nausea disappeared. When I mentioned this to Evelyn on the phone, suggesting maybe there was something toxic in the house, she got really defensive. She said the building was regularly inspected and perfectly safe, and reminded me I couldn't break the lease without proof. I decided to go back for one more night to see if my symptoms returned. That was February 12th. I'll never forget that date. I arrived back at the brownstone around 7 p.m. Within an hour, the nausea was back. By 9, I felt weak and shaky. I was upstairs in my bedroom, trying to decide whether to leave immediately or wait until morning, when I heard it, singing. A clear, young voice was coming from the 3rd floor. This made no sense. Ethel was supposed to be elderly and bedridden. The voice I heard was definitely not an old woman's. It was singing some kind of lullaby or folk song I didn't recognize, with words that weren't in English. I stood at the bottom of the stairs to the 3rd floor, frozen. The singing continued, and then I heard what sounded like laughter, a child's laughter. Then footsteps, light, quick steps pacing back and forth. I don't know what possessed me, but I called out, "Hello, Ethel?" The singing stopped abruptly. Complete silence followed. Then, very slowly, I heard footsteps approaching the top of the stairs. I couldn't see anything. The stairwell was dark, but I could feel someone standing there looking down at me. The air suddenly felt heavy and cold, like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the space. My vision started tunneling, and I felt this overwhelming sense of dread. Then came this smell, musty and sickly sweet, like rotting flowers. I heard a whisper. It wasn't in English, but somehow I understood the meaning. "You're not supposed to be here." I ran. I didn't even pack anything, just grabbed my purse and keys and bolted out the front door. I drove straight to my mom's house, shaking the entire way. The next morning, I woke up with a 103-degree fever. My mom wanted to take me to the ER, but I refused. Something inside me knew this wasn't a normal illness. I called in sick to all my orders and just tried to recover. For the next week, I got worse. Hair falling out in handfuls, nails practically disintegrating, constant nosebleeds. Then, just as suddenly, I started improving. By the end of February, I was almost back to normal. I never returned to that house except once with my mom to pack my things in broad daylight. I paid out the rest of my lease, 6 months' rent I could barely afford, just to be done with the place. Evelyn seemed annoyed, but not surprised. She never asked why I was leaving. I had the blood work done again after I moved out, and everything was normal. I had professional inspectors check the house for mold, lead, and other toxins. All tests came back negative. There was no logical explanation for what happened to me. I found a smaller apartment in Jamaica Plain in April and restarted my bakery business. I'm doing well now, physically and financially, but I can't shake the memory of that night. Last month, curiosity got the better of me. I drove past the brownstone on Mount Vernon Street around dusk. As I slowed down, I glanced up at the third-floor windows and saw a thin shadow move across one of them. Not an elderly woman's shadow, something else entirely. I still don't know what was living on that third floor, but whatever it was, I'm convinced it was feeding on me somehow, drawing out my life force, my vitality, my health. Maybe Ethel never existed. Maybe Evelyn knows exactly what's up there and finds tenants to sustain it. I've researched folklore from different cultures, looking for entities that drain life energy. There are so many possibilities. Vampiric spirits, energy parasites, or something else entirely. All I know is that something in that beautiful brownstone was slowly killing me, and if I hadn't left when I did, I might not be here to write this. Sometimes I still wake up at night feeling like something is standing over my bed watching me. On those nights, I turn on all the lights and bake until morning. The familiar motions of measuring flour and kneading dough ground me in reality and remind me I survived. But I still check my hair every morning to make sure it's not falling out again. And I still wonder about who or what is living on the third floor of that brownstone on Mount Vernon Street. Story 9. I've been a university lecturer for 20 years, teaching international relations at a respected institution in Cambridge. I've seen thousands of students come and go, but there's one I'll never forget for all the wrong reasons. I'm still shaken by the events that unfolded last autumn, and I find myself constantly wondering if I could have spotted the warning signs sooner. It was the beginning of the semester, and I had my usual mix of British and international students. Liang was a postgraduate student from a wealthy family in East Asia. From day one, something felt off about him. While most students were eager to engage, or at least showed basic respect, Liang would sit in the back of the lecture hall with this smirk whenever I spoke. It wasn't just disinterest, it was contempt. During the first seminar, I noticed how differently he behaved when my male colleague David joined us. Suddenly, Liang was attentive and respectful, but the moment I took over again, the eye-rolling and sighing would start. When I called on him to participate, he'd respond with curt, dismissive answers, often questioning my credentials or knowledge in front of everyone. With all due respect, Professor, I think my understanding of Asian foreign policy is more authentic than yours, he once said with that same smirk. I'd been researching the subject for 15 years. At first, I chalked it up to cultural differences or adjustment issues. I've dealt with challenging students before, and I always try to give them the benefit of the doubt. But looking back, I should have trusted my gut. There was something deeply unsettling about the way he looked at women. Not just me, but the female students too. His attendance became increasingly sporadic by mid-October. I'd see him on campus, laughing with his friends, but he'd skip my lectures. When he did show up, he'd arrive late, making a point to disrupt the class. After the reading week break in November, he stopped coming altogether. I emailed him about his absence and received no response. I flagged it with our department head, but these things happen. Students drop out or prioritize other modules. I was actually relieved not to deal with his hostility anymore. Then came that Friday in early December. I was working late, grading papers in my office when Sarah, our department administrator, knocked on my door. Her face was pale. "Maria, have you heard about Liang?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. I hadn't heard anything. Sarah hesitated before continuing. "He's been arrested. It's bad." She showed me a news article on her phone. I remember my hands going cold as I read the headline, university student arrested for kidnapping and assault. The victim wasn't named, but it described her as a 22-year-old Taiwanese student. I couldn't focus on my work after Sarah left. I kept thinking about Liang's behavior in my class, the disrespect, the underlying aggression. Had I missed something crucial? Should I have reported him earlier? The following Monday, I spoke with our head of security, who confirmed what had happened. Liang had been arrested by Cambridgeshire police for kidnapping, false imprisonment, and grievous bodily harm. The details were still emerging, but what they knew was horrific. According to the initial report, Liang had asked out a Taiwanese student he'd met at a university function. They weren't in the same department. She was studying engineering. They went on a date that by all accounts seemed normal at first. He was charming, attentive, bought her dinner at an expensive restaurant, took her for drinks afterward. Then he invited her back to his apartment to watch a film. Once they were inside, everything changed. When she checked the time and said she should head home, he blocked the door. She tried to leave anyway, and that's when he snapped. He grabbed her by the hair, slammed her against the wall, and told her she wasn't going anywhere. What happened next still makes me sick to think about. He restrained her, using cable ties to bind her wrists and ankles. He beat her face, her ribs, her back. Then he tortured her with a cigarette lighter, burning her arms and legs while telling her this was her education on why she shouldn't leave him, and that she was his property. She was trapped there for hours. The only reason she escaped was because Liang eventually fell asleep, and she managed to break free from the restraints by rubbing them against a sharp edge of a metal shelf until they frayed enough to snap. She fled the apartment at around 4 a.m. and immediately called the police from a nearby convenience store. When they arrested him, Liang apparently showed no remorse. He told the officers that in his culture, it was normal to discipline women. I remember feeling physically ill when I heard that. I've worked with international students for decades, and such behavior has nothing to do with cultural differences. It's about violence and control, plain and simple. The university acted quickly, suspending Liang pending the criminal investigation. Support services were mobilized for the victim, though I later heard she was too traumatized to continue her studies and return to Taiwan. I couldn't stop thinking about her, a bright young woman who came to Britain to study engineering, only to experience such brutality, and from someone who was supposed to be her peer, another international student who should have been part of her support network. I volunteered to help with the university's response, particularly in communicating with concerned international students. Many were worried about backlash or being associated with Liang's actions. It was a delicate situation that required careful handling. As the weeks passed, more details emerged. The police investigation uncovered disturbing material on Liang's phone and laptop. Searches about restraint techniques, violent pornography, and even forums where men discussed breaking women. There were also messages to friends back home bragging about how he could control Western women. Then, about 2 months after the incident, I received an email from our dean asking me to attend a meeting regarding Liang's case. I assumed it was to discuss the university's formal expulsion process or to provide a statement about my experiences with him as his lecturer. I was totally unprepared for what I actually heard in that meeting. The dean, the university's legal counsel, and a police liaison officer explained that Liang would not be facing trial in the UK. Despite the overwhelming evidence and the severity of the charges, he had somehow managed to avoid prison. His family had intervened with high-priced lawyers who negotiated a deal. Liang paid the victim a substantial amount of compensation, I heard it was in the hundreds of thousands of pounds, and in return he would be deported rather than imprisoned, with a lifetime ban from returning to the UK. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So he's essentially bought his way out of justice? I asked, not hiding my disgust. The police liaison officer looked uncomfortable. We wanted to pursue the case to its full extent, but the victim agreed to the settlement. She didn't want to go through a trial, which is understandable given the trauma she experienced. And what's to stop him from doing this to someone else when he returns home? I pressed. Nobody had a good answer for that. The university's legal counsel mentioned something about notifying authorities in Liang's home country, but we all knew that his family's wealth and connections would likely shield him there too. I walked out of that meeting shaking with anger. A man who had kidnapped, beaten, and tortured a woman was essentially getting away with it because he had money. The system had failed completely. Later that day, I found myself standing outside my lecture hall, watching students file in for class. Young women and men from all over the world, trusting our institution to provide not just an education, but a safe environment. I felt like we'd let them down. That evening, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Liang's smirking face in my mind, thinking about how his behavior in my class had been a red flag that I didn't take seriously enough. The way he spoke to female students, his dismissive attitude toward me, the underlying current of hostility. It had all been there from the beginning. The next morning, I drafted a proposal for our department about recognizing and responding to concerning student behavior, particularly patterns that might indicate misogyny or potential for violence. It wasn't much, but it was something I could actually do. I never heard what happened to Liang after he was deported. Sometimes I look him up online, half expecting to find news about another victim. So far, there's nothing, but that doesn't bring me much comfort. Men like him don't suddenly change. As for the victim, I hope she's healing and rebuilding her life. The university offered to help her continue her studies elsewhere, but I don't know if she took them up on it. Some wounds go too deep. It's been nearly a year now, and I still feel uneasy whenever I see a student who reminds me of Liang. I hate that he's made me suspicious, that he's tainted the trust that should exist between teachers and students. But I can't help it. I keep wondering if I'll encounter another student like him, and if next time I'll recognize the danger before it's too late. The worst part is knowing he's out there somewhere, probably living a comfortable life, perhaps even continuing his education at another institution that has no idea what he's capable of. And some other lecturer, somewhere else in the world, might be dealing with him now, seeing the same warning signs I saw, but not knowing what they mean. I don't think I'll ever fully shake this feeling of unease. Some people show you who they truly are in small ways before they reveal it completely. I just wish I'd paid closer attention. Story 10. I've never really shared this story with anyone outside my immediate family, but I feel like I need to get it off my chest. This happened about 3 years ago when I was 17, and honestly, I still get chills thinking about it. My best friend Jess and I had been looking forward to the California State Fair all summer. We'd both saved up our money from our summer jobs. I was working at a frozen yogurt place, and she was babysitting for this family down the street. The fair only comes to Sacramento once a year, and we were determined to make the most of it. When the day finally came, we were beyond excited. I remember it was a really hot day, like 95 degrees, and I was wearing shorts and my favorite tank top. Jess picked me up around 2 in the afternoon. We drove her mom's old Toyota Corolla, which barely had functioning AC, so we were practically melting by the time we got there. The first thing we noticed was how expensive the parking was. $15. That might not sound like much now, but when you're 17 and working minimum wage, it's a big deal. So we decided to be smart and park about 6 blocks away on this residential street. I remember Jess saying, "We'll save $15 and just walk a little. No big deal." God, I wish we'd just paid for the damn parking. The fair itself was amazing. We rode all the rides, stuffed ourselves with funnel cakes and corn dogs, and played those rigged carnival games for hours. I won this stupid little stuffed panda that I still have in my closet somewhere. It reminds me of how normal everything was before it all went wrong. As the night went on, we lost track of time. We were having so much fun that before we knew it, the announcements came on that the fair would be closing in 30 minutes. It was already past 10 at night. I remember checking my phone and seeing it was 10:18 p.m. exactly, and my mom had texted me twice asking when I'd be home. We decided to head out before the massive crowd started leaving. The fairgrounds were still pretty well lit and busy as we walked toward the exit, and we were laughing about this guy who had been obviously flirting with Jess at the ring toss game. Normal teenage stuff, you know? But once we got outside the fairgrounds, things started to feel different. The streets immediately around the fair still had some people walking to their cars, but as we kept walking farther away, there were fewer and fewer people. The streetlights seemed to get dimmer with each block. I remember this weird feeling starting to creep in, that awareness you get as a woman when you suddenly realize you're in a vulnerable situation. The laughing and joking between us got quieter. By the time we hit the 4th block, we weren't talking much at all. Jess was fumbling around in her purse for something, and I asked her what she was looking for. "My mace," she said, trying to make it sound like a joke. "Just in case, you know?" We both laughed it off, but it was that nervous kind of laugh. The kind where you're acknowledging something scary without wanting to say it out loud. I remember saying something like, "Don't be dramatic," but I was actually relieved she had it. The street we had parked on was completely deserted by this point. No pedestrians, no cars driving by. Just rows of parked cars and dark houses. Most of the porch lights were off. It was a weeknight, so I guess most people were already in bed. The worst part was how quiet it had gotten. During the day, there had been kids playing and people walking their dogs. Now there was just this eerie silence broken occasionally by the distant sounds of the fair closing down behind us. When we finally reached the street where we'd parked, Jess started digging around in her purse again, this time for her car keys. I was a few steps ahead of her, just wanting to get to the car as quickly as possible. I heard the fireworks start back at the fair. They always do a show right before closing completely. I turned around for a second to look at them lighting up the sky in the distance. They were pretty, all red and blue against the dark sky. That split-second decision to look back at the fireworks, I still think about it sometimes. When I turned back around, he was there. It happened so fast. One moment I was walking toward Jess's car, and the next, this man lunged out from behind a white van parked on the street. He moved in this strange, jerky way that didn't seem natural. He was tall, at least 6 feet, and wearing this dark hoodie even though it was still so hot outside. I couldn't see his face clearly at first. Before I could even process what was happening, he had both his arms around me, trying to lift me off the ground. I felt his hands dig into my ribs, and his grip was so tight it knocked the wind out of me. I couldn't even scream at First, it was like my voice was frozen in my throat. Then Jess started screaming. In the split second before she reacted, I remember thinking how strange it was that she sounded so far away, even though she was only a few feet behind me. She already had the mace in her hand from when she was joking about it earlier. She ran up and sprayed it directly at the man's face, but she was panicking and got me too, right in the side of my face and neck. If you've never been maced, I can't even describe how horrible it is. It feels like your skin is melting off. My eyes instantly swelled shut, and I couldn't breathe. I dropped to my knees, coughing and gasping. But the thing that terrifies me most, even now, is what happened next. The man didn't react to the mace at all. He should have been on the ground, screaming in pain like I was, but he just stood there, completely still, staring at us. His eyes were wide open, not blinking, even though he'd taken a direct hit of mace to the face. It was like he couldn't feel it. Then he spoke, in this calm, flat voice that didn't match the situation at all. I was just looking at her. Not yelling, not angry, just matter of fact, like he was commenting on the weather. His eyes never blinked, even as they must have been burning from the mace. That's when Jess grabbed me by the arm and pulled me up. We ran the last 20 feet to her car, stumbling and crying. My eyes were still burning so badly I could barely see, but adrenaline took over. I remember hearing footsteps behind us, but I was too terrified to look back. Jess unlocked the car, and we both dove in. She locked the doors immediately and started the engine. As we pulled away, I finally looked back through the rear window. He was just standing in the middle of the street, watching our car drive away. Not chasing us, not running, just watching. His face was still completely expressionless, despite having been maced full on. The image of him standing there, completely still under the street light, is burned into my memory. We drove straight to Jess's house, crying the whole way. My face was still on fire from the mace. When we got there, her mom helped me rinse my eyes and face with cold water for what felt like hours. She wanted to call the police, but I was so scared and just wanted to go home. We agreed we'd report it the next day after we'd calmed down. We did file a police report the next morning. The officer who took our statement seemed concerned but not surprised. He said they'd had several reports of suspicious activity around the fair, especially on the less busy streets where people parked to avoid the fees. About a week later, I was watching the local news with my mom when they ran a story about a predator they'd been tracking in the Sacramento area. He'd been targeting women around the American River trails and the areas surrounding large events like the State Fair. They said he drove a white van and had attempted to abduct at least 3 women in the past month, dragging them into his vehicle. I literally froze when I saw the police sketch. It wasn't detailed, but the features matched what I remembered, those wide, unblinking eyes especially. The reporter said they believed he might be using some kind of drug that made him immune to pain and pepper spray. That's when it really hit me. I had almost become another statistic. If Jess hadn't had her mace ready, if she hadn't reacted so quickly, I probably wouldn't be here typing this. They caught the guy about a month later. I didn't follow the case closely because honestly, I was trying to forget the whole thing. But Jess told me they found evidence in his van that he'd successfully abducted other women before attempting to take me. Women who hadn't been as lucky as I was. I still don't go out alone at night. I park in well-lit, busy areas, even if it costs more. And I carry mace everywhere I go. Not as a joke, but clipped right to my keychain where I can grab it in a second. The thing that still haunts me most isn't the attack itself. It's those unblinking eyes and that calm voice saying I was just looking at her, while his face was covered in mace, like he wasn't even human. And sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Jess had been the one walking ahead instead of me. Would I have reacted as quickly as she did? I don't know. And that's something I hope I never have to find out. Story 11. I've been a technician for the last 9 years, fixing vending machines, jukeboxes, and arcade cabinets all over the Midlands. Most days are completely routine. I drive to the location, fix whatever's broken, and move on to the next job. I've worked in pubs, shopping centers, bowling alleys, you name it. Usually it's just mechanical issues or software resets, nothing complicated. Last Tuesday night was different. I can't stop thinking about what happened, and I'm still trying to make sense of it all. I got a call around 7 in the evening to fix a Mario Kart arcade cabinet at a motorway service station about 40 minutes from my flat. The cabinet had been down for almost a week, and the manager was getting antsy about lost revenue. He offered to pay the emergency call-out fee if I could get there that night. Normally, I wouldn't take jobs that late, but work had been a bit slow lately, and I could use the extra money. So I loaded up my van with tools and headed out. The service station was one of those big ones connected to a small mall, the kind with fast food places, a small supermarket, and an arcade area. I arrived just after 8:30 and met the night manager, a tired-looking bloke named Pete. He showed me to the broken cabinet and left me to it. The issue turned out to be fairly straightforward, a damaged control board and a loose connection. I had the parts in my van and the repairs only took about an hour. After testing it a few times, I'm not going to lie, I love playing a few free games as quality control. I called Pete over to sign off on the work. By this point, it was nearly 10 o'clock. The service station was mostly empty, except for a few truckers grabbing coffee and a couple of late-night travelers. The arcade area was completely deserted. With the long drive home ahead of me, I decided to grab something to eat first. I went to the burger place in the food court and ordered a meal. There were maybe 3 or 4 other people scattered around the seating area, all keeping to themselves. I sat at a table near the window, scrolling through my phone while I ate. That's when I first noticed them. 4 people walked in wearing hoodies pulled up over their heads. What immediately caught my attention was that they were all wearing masks. Not medical masks, but these weird plastic face coverings that looked homemade. They were crudely painted with these exaggerated smiles that didn't quite match up with the eye holes. It reminded me of those Purge films, but more amateur. At first, I figured they were just teenagers being idiots. The service station is right off the motorway, so you get all sorts passing through. I didn't think much of it and went back to my food. They loitered by the entrance for a few minutes, not ordering anything, just standing there and occasionally looking around. I tried not to stare, but I kept glancing up at them. Something about the way they were just watching everyone made me uneasy. Then they started walking towards me. I remember feeling my stomach tighten. They moved in this strange, synchronized way. Not exactly in step, but like they were all part of the same organism. They came right up to my table and just stood there, surrounding me on 3 sides. "All right, mate?" one of them said. His voice was deep and slightly muffled behind the mask. I could see his eyes through the crude holes in the plastic, staring down at me. "Yeah, fine," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Just finishing up." "What you doing here so late?" another one asked. This one was taller than the others, and the mask looked too small for his face. "Just finished some work," I said, pointing vaguely toward the arcade area. Fixing one of the games. He fixes games, the first one repeated, turning to the others. Hear that? He's a game fixer. The shortest one of the group leaned in closer. Can you fix me? The voice was high-pitched. Could have been a young girl, or maybe even a child. That realization made everything so much worse. What was a kid doing with these people at this hour? Sorry, I said, not sure I'd heard correctly. I said, can you fix me? The voice was louder now, with this manic edge to it that made the hairs on my neck stand up. I just fix machines, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Arcade games and that. The tallest one suddenly slammed his hands down on my table, making my drink spill. But we're broken too, aren't we? He leaned in, the crude smile on his mask now just inches from my face. Don't you want to fix us? I started gathering my things, trying to stay calm. Look, I'm just trying to eat my dinner before heading home. Dinner before heading home, the third one mimicked, making my words sound childish. He's got a routine, this one. The fourth member of the group hadn't spoken yet. He was medium height and build, but there was something different about him. While the others were fidgety and animated, this one just stood perfectly still, watching me through those misshapen eye holes. I stood up, grabbing my jacket. I'm going to head out now. The shortest one grabbed my arm. Even through my jacket, I could feel how cold their hand was. Don't go yet. We're just getting to know you. I pulled my arm away and walked quickly toward the exit, not looking back. I could hear them laughing behind me, but I didn't turn around. The few other people in the food court were either oblivious or deliberately not getting involved. As I pushed through the doors into the main part of the service station, I glanced back. They were following me, still maintaining that strange, synchronized movement. My heart was pounding now. I headed straight for the exit, walking as fast as I could without breaking into a run. I didn't want to show fear, but I was properly scared by this point. The main part of the service station was almost empty. There was one person at the till in the shop and a cleaner mopping the floor near the toilets. Neither of them looked up as I passed. I could hear the footsteps of the four masked figures behind me, keeping pace. I pushed through the main doors into the car park. The night air was cold, and the place was dimly lit by overhead lamps that cast long shadows across the tarmac. My van was parked about 50 meters away, near the back of the lot, where there was space for larger vehicles. As I fumbled for my keys, I heard the doors behind me open. "Game fixer," the deep voice called out. "Where are you running to?" I didn't respond, just kept walking toward my van, keys clutched tightly in my hand. The parking lot was almost empty, just a few cars and lorries scattered around. No one else was in sight. I was about halfway to my van when I heard them start running. The sound of multiple footsteps pounding on the tarmac made me break into a sprint. I reached my van and desperately tried to get the key in the door, my hands shaking so badly I kept missing. They were closing in fast. I could hear their labored breathing and strange, excited yelps. Just as I finally got the door open, the tallest one slammed into the side of the van, rocking it on its suspension. I scrambled inside and locked the door just as hands started banging on the windows. Four masked faces pressed against the glass, those crude painted smiles now seeming to leer at me with malice. "Let us in," the childlike voice shouted, high and frantic. "We just want to play." I jammed the key into the ignition and started the engine. The silent one suddenly produced something shiny from his pocket, a knife or box cutter. He dragged it along the side of my van as I began to pull away, the screech of metal on metal making my teeth clench. As I accelerated, they chased after the van. The shortest one actually managed to jump onto the back bumper and hang on for a few seconds before falling off. In my rearview mirror, I could see all four of them standing in the middle of the car park, watching my van disappear. I didn't slow down until I was back on the motorway, and even then, I kept checking my mirrors, convinced they might somehow be following me. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to grip the steering wheel with all my strength to keep control. When I got home, I sat in my driveway for nearly 20 minutes, unable to make myself get out of the van. It wasn't until I'd triple-checked that no one had followed me that I finally went inside and locked every door and window. The next morning, I checked my van in daylight. There was a long, deep gash along the driver's side, cutting through the company logo. It wasn't just some scratch. Whoever had done it had really put force behind it. I reported the incident to the police, but they weren't much help. They said the service station was known for having trouble occasionally, and they'd look into it, but I never heard anything back. When I called the service station manager, he seemed uncomfortable and just said they'd had a few incidents recently. It's been 5 days now, and I still can't shake the feeling of those masks staring at me. I've taken time off work because I can't face the idea of another late-night call-out. I keep wondering who they were and what they wanted. Was it just random intimidation, or had they been watching me specifically? The thing that haunts me most is the certainty that if I hadn't made it to my van when I did, I wouldn't have been leaving that service station in one piece. There was something about the way they lost control at the end, the way they chased me, like wild beasts that had caught the scent of blood. They weren't just trying to scare me. They wanted something else. I've been fixing arcade machines for 9 years, and I've never felt unsafe before. Now I jump at shadows and check my rearview mirror constantly. I can't stop seeing those crude, painted smiles and thinking about that childlike voice asking if I could fix them. I don't know what would have happened if they'd caught me, and that's the thought I can't get out of my head. Story 12. I've been working part-time at Riverdale Stadium for about 8 months now. It's nothing special, just a cleaning gig 3 nights a week to help pay for college. The work is pretty straightforward. We come in during the 7th inning and start preparing. Then once the game ends, we clean until the place is spotless. Most nights are completely routine. Empty trash cans, mop floors, wipe down surfaces, repeat. Nothing exciting. That all changed last Tuesday night. It was a standard home game against the Monarchs. Average attendance, nothing special about the crowd. The game ran a bit late, ending around 10:30. By 11, most fans had left the stadium, with just a few stragglers finishing their beers or taking pictures. I was assigned to clean the West Concourse restrooms that night. These are the large ones with about 12 stalls in each. I usually start with the women's room since it empties out faster, then move to the men's. The routine is always the same. Prop the door open with the cleaning cart, put up the closed for cleaning sign, and get to work. When I entered the men's room just after 11, it was mostly empty. 2 guys were washing their hands, and I noticed feet visible under one of the middle stalls. Nothing unusual there. I'd just work around that person until they finished. The 2 guys left, and I started cleaning the sinks and mirrors. About 15 minutes later, I realized the stall was still occupied. I could see the same shoes under the door, black sneakers with white soles. I remember thinking it was a bit weird, but figured maybe the guy wasn't feeling well or something. I continued cleaning the urinals and other stalls, occasionally glancing at those shoes, which hadn't moved at all. After finishing everything else in the bathroom, that stall was the only thing left. It had now been close to 30 minutes, and the same feet remained visible. The stadium was practically empty by this point, and my supervisor would be coming around soon to check my section. I approached the stall door and knocked gently. "Hey man, sorry to bother you, but I need to clean this stall. We're closing up the stadium soon." No response, not even movement. I knocked again, louder this time. "Excuse me, sir, are you okay in there?" Still nothing. I was starting to get concerned, wondering if the person had passed out or was having some medical issue. I bent down to look under the gap and noticed something that sent a chill through me. The feet were gone. The stall was seemingly empty, but the door was still locked from the inside. My first thought was that they might have climbed out, though I couldn't imagine why anyone would do that instead of just unlocking the door. I knelt down to look under the gap again, trying to see if anyone was still inside. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There weren't any feet visible, but the shadow inside the stall was different. Something was definitely in there. "Hello? I can see someone's in there. The stadium is closing. I need to clean this stall." My voice was shakier than I wanted it to be. No response, just dead silence. I decided to use my master key to unlock the door from the outside. These bathrooms have those locks that can be opened with a flathead screwdriver in emergencies. I grabbed one from my cart and knelt down to reach the lock mechanism from below the door. As I was fumbling with the lock, I glanced up through the gap at the bottom of the stall. That's when I saw him. A man was standing directly on top of the toilet, completely clothed, his shoes pressed firmly against the porcelain bowl. He was perfectly still, looking down at me through the gap. Not at the door, at me, directly meeting my eyes as I peered under. His face was expressionless, completely blank. He wasn't drunk or homeless. He was wearing normal clothes, a blue button-up shirt and jeans. He looked like any average fan at the game. I jerked back, startled, hitting my head on the bottom of the sink behind me. "Jesus, what are you doing in there? The stadium's closing." The man didn't respond. He just kept staring at me through the gap, not moving a muscle. "Sir, you need to leave now. I have to clean this stall." I tried to sound authoritative, but my voice cracked. That's when it happened. Without changing his expression or saying a word, the man suddenly began pounding on the stall door with both fists. Bang, 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 bang. Violent, rhythmic pounding that echoed through the empty bathroom. The entire metal stall was shaking with each impact. I scrambled backward across the floor, my heart racing. The pounding continued for about 10 seconds, then abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. "I'm getting security," I called out, my voice trembling. I backed toward the bathroom exit, not wanting to turn my back on the stall. I rushed out to find my coworker, Mike, who was cleaning the concession area about 50 feet away. "Mike, there's a guy in the bathroom acting crazy. He's standing on the toilet and pounding on the door." Mike looked concerned. "Did you radio security?" "No, I came straight to you. My radio's on my cart in the bathroom." "Let's go check it out first," Mike said. "Might just be some drunk guy." We hurried back to the men's room, which was exactly as I'd left it. Cleaning cart by the door, lights on, everything normal. Except when we approached the stall, it was empty. The door hung partially open, swinging slightly. "Are you sure someone was in here?" Mike asked. "Yes." He was standing on the toilet and pounding on the door like a maniac. Mike checked the stall. "Well, he's gone now." We checked the other stalls, but the bathroom was completely empty. "Maybe he left while you were coming to get me," Mike suggested. "I guess. I said, but something felt wrong. I hadn't been gone more than a minute, and there was only one entrance to that bathroom. We would have seen him if he'd left. Mike went back to his section, and I tried to focus on finishing my work. I quickly cleaned the last stall, constantly looking over my shoulder. Every noise made me jump. After finishing the bathrooms, I moved on to emptying the trash cans along the concourse. That's when I saw him again. I was approaching the Home Run Grill concession stand, which was closed and dark. As I got closer, I noticed movement behind the counter. Someone was crouched down, hiding behind the refrigerator unit. At first, I only saw a shadow, but when I moved to get a better angle, I could clearly see it was the same man from the bathroom. He was squeezed into the narrow space between the refrigerator and the wall, completely still except for his eyes, which followed my movement. I froze. We made eye contact for what felt like an eternity. He didn't blink, didn't move, just stared at me with that same blank expression. "Hey!" I finally managed to call out, my voice echoing in the empty concourse. That's when he bolted. In one fluid motion, he squeezed out from behind the refrigerator and vaulted over the concession counter. He ran straight at me, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was going to attack. Instead, he darted past me, brushing against my shoulder as he sprinted toward the seating area. "Stop!" I yelled, but he was already racing down the steps toward the field. I grabbed my radio. "Security, there's an intruder on the west concourse heading toward the field." By the time I reached the railing overlooking the field, the man had already jumped over the wall and was sprinting across the infield. The grounds crew, who were still working on the field, stopped and stared as he ran past them. 2 security guards entered from the opposite side and began chasing him. The man ran with unnatural speed, making it all the way to the center field wall before the guards started closing in. Instead of surrendering, he started climbing the padded outfield wall, trying to reach the top. The security guards managed to grab him by the legs and pull him down. Even from a distance, I could see him struggling violently as 3 guards restrained him on the warning track. My supervisor radioed me to come down to the security office. When I arrived, the police were already there. They asked me to explain exactly what had happened, and I told them everything. The bathroom stall, the pounding on the door, finding him behind the refrigerator. "Did he say anything to you at any point?" one officer asked. "No, not a word. He was completely silent the whole time." "Did he seem intoxicated or under the influence?" "No, that's what was so weird. He seemed totally clear-eyed and deliberate, like he knew exactly what he was doing." The security chief explained that they had searched the man and found no weapons, no identification, and no stadium ticket. Nothing in his pockets at all. He'd refused to speak to them as well, not saying a single word while they detained him. "How did he even get into the stadium?" I asked. "We don't know," the security chief admitted. "We're reviewing the camera footage, but so far we can't find him entering through any gate. It's like he just appeared inside." The police took him away in handcuffs. As they escorted him past the security office, I got one last look at him. Unlike most people being arrested who look angry or scared, his face remained completely expressionless. As he passed by the door, he turned his head and looked directly at me. No emotion, no recognition, just that same empty stare. I finished my shift that night in a daze. The security team did a full sweep of the stadium before letting us leave, checking every bathroom stall, closet, and storage room. It's been 5 days, and I still don't know who that man was or what he wanted. The police contacted me yesterday to say they still haven't been able to identify him. Apparently, he hasn't spoken a single word since his arrest. No fingerprint matches, no facial recognition hits. Nothing. I've worked 2 shifts since then, and I can't stop looking over my shoulder. Every time I clean that bathroom, I check each stall carefully before entering. I keep seeing his face in my mind, that blank expression as he stood on the toilet, silently staring at me through the gap in the door. I don't know if he was planning to attack me or someone else, or if he was just some disturbed person who found a way into the stadium. But something about his deliberate movements, his silence, and that empty stare makes me think this wasn't random. It felt calculated, like he was hunting for something or someone. What still haunts me is the fact that nobody knows how he got in or how long he had been hiding in the stadium. Was he there during the game, watching and waiting? Or did he somehow slip in afterward? And why was he standing on that toilet, perfectly still and silent, until I discovered him? I requested a schedule change so I don't have to work the late shift alone anymore. My boss didn't ask questions. I think the security footage told him everything he needed to know. Story 13. I still can't sleep through the night. My boyfriend says I should see a therapist, but how do I even begin to explain what we saw? It's been 3 weeks, and I keep replaying everything in my head. I figured writing it down might help, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can make sense of what happened. It was a Friday night in late October. My boyfriend Matt and I had been dating for about 7 months. We both still live with our parents. Yeah, I know, we're 23. But the economy sucks and rent is insane. So finding privacy is always a challenge. Usually we'd get a hotel room or wait until one of our families was out of town, but we were both broke that week. Matt suggested we drive out to this spot he knew about, a clearing in the woods off Highway 16, about 40 minutes outside of town. It was this dirt road that wasn't even marked on Google Maps. He'd found it once when he was out hiking with his cousin last year. The spot was completely secluded. No houses for miles, just dense forest surrounding a small clearing. We left around 9:30 that night. Matt picked me up in his black Ford Ranger, and we stopped for snacks and drinks at the gas station. The cashier gave us this weird look, probably figuring out exactly what 2 young people buying condoms and energy drinks at that hour were up to. I remember feeling embarrassed but also excited. It was spontaneous and felt like an adventure. The drive was longer than I expected. We turned off the main highway onto a county road, then onto a smaller gravel road, and finally onto this narrow dirt path that I swear wasn't meant for vehicles. Tree branches scratched against the windows and roof of the truck. Matt had to drive really slow because the headlights only illuminated a few feet ahead, and the path was rough with roots and rocks. "Are you sure this is right?" I kept asking, and Matt would just nod and say he recognized certain landmarks, a fallen tree, a weird rock formation that looked like a face, stuff like that. Finally, after what felt like forever bumping along this path, we emerged into a small circular clearing. It was maybe 30 feet across, just a patch of dirt and sparse grass surrounded by tall pines and oaks. The moon was nearly full that night, casting everything in this eerie bluish glow. Matt cut the engine and turned off the lights. The silence hit me immediately. No traffic noise, no distant sirens or neighbors' TVs, just the sound of wind through the trees and some crickets. It was beautiful, but also a little unnerving how completely alone we were. We climbed into the back seat, laughing and kissing. I won't go into details about what happened next, but we were both half undressed when suddenly the darkness outside was broken by distant lights through the trees. "What the hell?" Matt froze. "Is that headlights?" My heart dropped into my stomach. We scrambled to get dressed, fumbling with buttons and zippers in the dark. The truck Matt drove was black, and we were parked toward the edge of the clearing with no lights on, so I prayed whoever it was wouldn't notice us. "How is this possible?" I whispered. "You said nobody comes here." "Nobody does," Matt hissed back, "at least not that I know of." The lights grew brighter, bouncing through the trees as a vehicle made its way down the same dirt path we'd taken. We ducked down in the back seat, peering over the edge of the window. A white pickup truck emerged into the clearing, its headlights sweeping across the area. For a terrifying second, the lights passed right over Matt's truck, and I was certain we'd been spotted. But the driver didn't react. He parked about 20 feet away from us, positioning his truck so the headlights illuminated the center of the clearing. I was shaking so hard my teeth were chattering. Matt put his hand over my mouth gently and whispered, "Don't make a sound." The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. In the glow of his truck's headlights, I could see him clearly. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing dark jeans and a heavy canvas jacket. He had a baseball cap pulled low over his face, making it hard to see his features, but I could tell he was middle-aged, maybe in his 40s or 50s. He stood there for a moment, looking around the clearing, and I swear my heart stopped. But his gaze never lingered on our truck. It was like he didn't even register its presence. The man walked to the back of his pickup and lowered the tailgate. He reached in and pulled out a shovel. Not a small garden shovel, but a full-sized one with a long wooden handle. The kind you'd use to dig a proper hole. Matt's grip on my arm tightened painfully. We watched in stunned silence as the man walked to the center of the clearing, right where his headlights were pointing, and began to dig. There was something so methodical about the way he worked. He wasn't frantic or hurried. Each movement was practiced and efficient. Stick the shovel in the ground, push it down with his foot, lift the dirt, deposit it to the side, repeat. It was like watching someone who had done this exact task many times before. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Matt and I were pressed against each other in the back seat, barely breathing. The only sounds were the scrape of the shovel against dirt and the occasional grunt from the man as he worked. After about 15 minutes of digging, the shovel made a different sound, a dull thunk, like it had hit something solid. The man stopped immediately. He dropped to his knees beside the hole and set the shovel aside. I watched as he leaned forward, reaching into the hole with both hands. He was struggling with something, pulling and twisting, his shoulders straining with effort. Finally, whatever it was came free, and he sat back on his heels. The object was wrapped in what looked like a tarp or heavy plastic sheeting, bound with duct tape. It was maybe 3 feet long and seemed heavy from the way he handled it. My mind was racing with horrible possibilities. The man stood up, carrying the wrapped object in his arms. It was clearly heavy. He staggered slightly under its weight. He walked back to his truck and heaved the object into the bed with a sickening thud that echoed through the clearing. Then he went back to the hole, picked up the shovel, and began filling it in. He was just as methodical with this task, making sure to pack down the dirt every few shovelfuls. When he finished, he swept pine needles and forest debris over the area with his boot, making it blend in with the surrounding ground. If you didn't know where to look, you'd never know the ground had been disturbed. The whole time, Matt and I didn't move a muscle. I was afraid even the sound of my heartbeat might give us away. I kept thinking about my phone in my purse on the floor of the truck. Should I try to record this, take a picture? But the thought of moving, of potentially making a noise that would alert him to our presence, kept me frozen. Finally, the man returned the shovel to his truck, closed the tailgate, and got back into the driver's seat. The engine started with a rumble that seemed deafening in the quiet forest. He backed up, turned around, and drove back down the path the way he'd come. We waited in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only 15 minutes, terrified he might come back. The clearing was dark again, with only the moonlight illuminating the freshly disturbed earth where the man had been digging. "We need to get out of here," Matt finally whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. We climbed awkwardly from the back seat to the front. Matt's hands were shaking so badly he could barely get the key in the ignition. We didn't turn on the headlights until we were back on the dirt path, afraid the man might still be nearby and notice the lights. The drive back was tense and silent. We kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see headlights following us. Every bump in the road made me jump. When we finally reached the main highway, I burst into tears from the sheer relief of seeing other cars, of being back in civilization. We pulled into a 24-hour diner parking lot and just sat there, trying to process what we'd witnessed. "Should we call the police?" I asked. Matt ran his hands through his hair. "And tell them what? That we were trespassing in the woods to have sex and saw some guy digging? We don't even know if he did anything wrong." "Are you kidding me? He dug up something wrapped in plastic in the middle of the night in a remote clearing. That's not normal behavior." "I know, but we don't have any proof. We don't know who he is or what was in that package. We don't even know exactly where we were. I couldn't find that clearing again if I tried, and we'd have to explain why we were there in the first place." I knew he was right, but it felt wrong to just say nothing. In the end, we decided to make an anonymous call to the police tip line the next day. We gave them approximate directions to the clearing and described what we'd seen, but without identifying ourselves. As far as I know, nothing ever came of it. There were no news stories about discoveries in the woods, no missing persons cases that seemed connected. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but then I catch Matt staring off into space with this haunted look, and I know it was real. I can't stop thinking about what was in that package. I can't stop wondering how many other packages might be buried in that clearing. And I can't stop looking over my shoulder, afraid I'll see a white pickup truck following me. I jump at every unexpected noise now. I can't sleep with the lights off. Matt and I haven't been intimate since that night. It just brings back too many memories. Neither of us talks about it much, but it's always there between us. Sometimes I think about driving back out there in daylight, trying to find that clearing again. But then I remember the practiced way that man dug, how efficient he was, how he didn't seem surprised at all to find something buried there. Like he was the one who put it there in the first place. And then I wonder, what if he comes back while I'm there? What if he recognizes me somehow? So I stay away. But I can't escape the memory of that night, or the terrible certainty that we witnessed something we were never meant to see. Story 14. I've never been able to shake this experience, even years later. It was my senior year at Oakfield High, and like many of my classmates, I was focused on just getting through those final months before graduation. I was 18, trying to maintain my GPA, and I'd signed up for weightlifting as my last period class because I thought it would be an easy credit and a good way to blow off steam at the end of the day. Everything was normal until that Wednesday in late October. Our regular weightlifting teacher, Coach Bryant, was out sick. As soon as the substitute walked in, I felt something in my gut twist. I can't explain it. It wasn't anything he did initially. Just something about his presence that instantly put me on edge. He was maybe in his late 30s or early 40s, with thinning hair on top and this patchy beard that didn't grow in evenly. He wore khakis and a blue button-up that looked like he'd slept in it. But it was his eyes that really bothered me. They were pale blue, almost gray, and when he looked at someone, it felt like he was looking through them, not at them. He introduced himself as Mr. Harmon. His voice was soft, but had this underlying intensity that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I remember thinking it was weird how he kept scanning the room as he spoke, like he was looking for something or someone. When he started taking attendance, I was talking quietly with my friend Jess about our calculus homework. He went through the names methodically until he reached mine. "Madison Carter," he called out. I raised my hand and said, "Here." What happened next still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. He looked up from the roster, his eyes locking onto mine with this unsettling focus. He inhaled deeply through his nose and said, "You smell good, Madison." The way he said my name, slowly, like he was savoring each syllable, made me instantly uncomfortable. A few of my classmates snickered, probably thinking it was just a weird, awkward comment from a socially inept substitute. But I knew instantly it was something else. Something was very wrong. I tried to brush it off, but throughout the class, I kept catching him staring at me. Not like a normal teacher glance, but this sustained, intense staring. When I was doing squats with the bar, I could feel his eyes on me. When I moved to the bench press, he came over to spot me, standing way closer than Coach Bryant ever did. His breath smelled like coffee and something sour that I couldn't identify. "You have good form," he said quietly, in a way only I could hear. "Very good form." I finished my reps quickly and moved away, sticking close to Jess for the rest of the class. I whispered to her about how creepy he was being, and she agreed, saying he gave her the creeps too. When the final bell rang, I literally sprinted to the locker room to change. I didn't shower like I usually would. I just wanted to get out of there. As I was leaving, I glanced back and saw Mr. Harmon watching me from the gym door. He smiled and waved, but it wasn't friendly. It was possessive, like he knew something I didn't. I hurried to my car in the student parking lot, this beat-up Honda Civic my parents had gotten me for my birthday. I tossed my backpack onto the passenger seat and started the engine, cranking up the heat because it was getting cold outside. As I was adjusting my rearview mirror, I noticed a dark green sedan pulling out of the faculty parking area. It wasn't a car I recognized, so I figured it must be Mr. Harmon's. I didn't think much of it at first. Teachers leave, school the same time as students, right? But then, as I turned onto the main road, I noticed the green sedan was behind me. Still, lots of people leave school and head in the same direction. No big deal. But after 3 turns, including one I made at the last minute because I'd almost missed my turnoff, the green sedan was still there. My heart started beating faster. I tried to calm myself down. It could be a coincidence, I told myself. Oakfield isn't that big of a town. Maybe he lives near me. I live on Pinewood Drive, which is this quiet dead-end street with maybe 15 houses total. As I turned onto my street, the green sedan followed. Now I was officially freaked out. I pulled into my driveway quickly, fumbling with my keys as I watched in my rearview mirror. The green sedan slowed down as it passed my house. I couldn't see the driver clearly because of the glare from the setting sun on the windshield, but I knew it was him. The car continued to the end of the street, where there's just a small turnaround area before the woods start. I grabbed my stuff and ran inside, locking the door behind me. My mom wasn't home from work yet, and my dad wouldn't be back for another hour. I went straight to the living room window and peeked through the blinds just in time to see the green sedan driving slowly back up the street. It was like he was memorizing which house was mine. I called my mom immediately, my voice shaking as I told her what happened. She tried to calm me down, suggesting maybe the substitute lived nearby or was visiting someone on our street. But I knew that wasn't it. The way he looked at me in class, the comment about how I smelled, and now this, it was too much to be coincidence. My mom got home about 20 minutes later, and I told her everything in detail. She looked concerned, but still tried to rationalize it. "Maybe you're reading too much into this, Madison," she said. But she promised she'd mention it to Dad when he got home. We ate dinner around 6:30, and I tried to focus on my homework afterward, but I couldn't concentrate. Every small noise made me jump. Around 8 o'clock, I went upstairs to take a shower, trying to wash away the stress of the day. That's when I heard my dad shouting from downstairs. I quickly turned off the water, wrapped a towel around myself, and ran to my bedroom window, which faces the street. There it was, the green sedan, parked directly across from our house, headlights off. My dad was standing in our front yard, yelling and gesturing at the car. Before I could even process what was happening, the sedan's headlights flicked on and it sped away, tires squealing slightly as it turned at the end of our street. My dad came back inside, his face red with anger. "Who the hell was that?" he demanded. I started crying, explaining everything about Mr. Harmon while my mom tried to calm both of us down. That night, I could barely sleep. Every time I heard a car drive by, I'd go to the window to check. My dad stayed up late, periodically checking outside, but the green sedan didn't return. The next morning, my parents insisted on driving me to school. My dad went straight to the principal's office while my mom walked me to my first class. I felt like a little kid, but I was also relieved not to be alone. The principal, Mrs. Delaney, took the situation seriously, especially after my dad threatened to call the police if they didn't address it immediately. She assured us that Mr. Harmon would not be teaching my weightlifting class, or any class that day, and that they would investigate. When I got to weightlifting that afternoon, Coach Bryant was back. I was so relieved I almost cried. After class, Mrs. Delaney called me to her office. She told me that Mr. Harmon had been removed from the substitute teacher list and that the school was conducting an investigation. They'd discovered he had apparently done similar things at another school district before coming to Oakfield, but it hadn't shown up in his background check because no formal charges had ever been filed. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. That Friday night, 2 days after the incident, I was home alone for about an hour while my parents went to pick up takeout for dinner. I was in the living room watching TV when I noticed headlights sweep across the wall as a car pulled up outside. Thinking it was my parents, I got up to help them with the food. But when I looked out the window, my blood turned to ice. It was the green sedan parked right in front of our house. The driver's door opened and I saw him step out, Mr. Harmon. In the glow of the streetlight, I could see him looking directly at our house. He just stood there staring like he was trying to see through the walls. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed my phone and called my dad, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. "He's here," I whispered when he answered. "Mr. Harmon is outside the house." My dad told me to lock all the doors and windows, stay away from them, and call 911 immediately. I did exactly as he said, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. As I was talking to the 911 dispatcher, I heard a soft knocking on the front door. "Madison?" Mr. Harmon's voice came through the door, quiet but clear. "I know you're in there, Madison. I just want to talk to you." I retreated to the kitchen, still on the phone with 911. The dispatcher assured me officers were on their way. The knocking continued, getting louder and more insistent. "Madison, don't be afraid," he called out. "We have a connection. I felt it the moment I saw you. You felt it too, didn't you?" I was full on crying now, trying to stay quiet so he wouldn't hear me. Then the knocking stopped. For a moment I thought maybe he'd left. Then I heard a scratching sound coming from the back of the house. The kitchen has a door that leads to the backyard. The scratching was coming from there, like someone trying to pick the lock. I grabbed a knife from the drawer and backed myself into the corner of the kitchen, furthest from the door, still clutching my phone. "Officers are 3 minutes out," the dispatcher told me. "Stay on the line." Those 3 minutes felt like 3 hours. The scratching continued, then stopped. Then I heard footsteps on the wooden deck outside, moving toward the kitchen window. A shadow passed by the window, and I stifled a scream. Just as I thought the window was about to slide open, I heard sirens in the distance. The shadow at the window disappeared, and I heard rapid footsteps moving away from the house. By the time the police arrived, there was no sign of Mr. Harmon or his car. They took my statement and searched the area, but found nothing except some scratches on the back door lock. They promised to patrol our street regularly and told me to call immediately if I saw him again. My parents arrived home during all this, frantic with worry. My mom held me as I sobbed, while my dad spoke with the officers. The police took the situation seriously and opened an investigation. They discovered that Mr. Harmon's real name wasn't even Harmon. He'd used fake credentials to get on the substitute list. His real name was Paul Terrence, and he had a history of stalking young women in at least 2 other states. We installed a security system the next day, and my parents took turns staying home with me for the next week. The police eventually tracked down Paul Terrence and arrested him about 40 miles away, living in a motel under yet another fake name. In his room, they found a notebook with my name written over and over, along with detailed information about me and my daily schedule. Even after his arrest, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I changed schools for the rest of my senior year, taking online classes to finish out my credits. I still have nightmares about his face at the window, about what might have happened if I'd been alone for just a little longer that night. It's been 3 years, and I still check the locks twice before going to bed. I still look over my shoulder when I walk to my car, and I still can't shake the memory of his voice saying my name, or the way he said I smelled good that first day in class, like he was already imagining what it would be like to hunt me. Story 15. It was the spring of '45, just after Hitler ate his bullet in that bunker. The war in Europe was technically over, but nobody had bothered to tell the diehards. I was stationed at this makeshift POW camp about 30 miles outside Frankfurt. Nothing fancy, just a bunch of hastily erected buildings surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. I'd been there about 3 months by then. My name's Murphy, Daniel Murphy, and I guess I was in a unique position. My grandmother was from Bavaria, so I grew up hearing German around the house. Never thought much of it until Uncle Sam decided it made me valuable. I wasn't fluent or anything, but I could understand enough to get by, especially after a crash course during basic training. I was a private, fresh-faced and barely 20 when Captain Richards called me into his office. He was a hard-nosed career military man with perpetually bloodshot eyes and that 1,000-yard stare you see in guys who've seen too much. He sat me down and laid it out plain. They wanted me to play a role. "Murphy, we need ears on the ground," he said, lighting a cigarette. "These krauts don't say much during interrogation, but they talk plenty among themselves. We need to know what they're saying." The plan was simple but risky. I'd pose as a regular guard, but my actual job was to listen. I wouldn't wear any special insignia that marked me as an intelligence asset. To everyone else, I was just another GI doing his tour. In reality, I was supposed to blend in, keep my ears open, and report anything suspicious. For weeks, it was boring as hell. The prisoners we had were mostly Wehrmacht, regular army guys who were relieved the fighting was over. They complained about the food, reminisced about home, and occasionally grumbled about Hitler's madness that got them into this mess. Nothing worth reporting. Then everything changed on May 18th. I remember the date clearly because it was my younger sister's birthday back home, and I'd been thinking about her all morning. It started with dust clouds on the horizon. Our lookouts spotted a massive column approaching the camp. Hundreds of men on foot looking ragged and defeated. Word came down quickly. A large group of SS troops had surrendered and were being brought in. The SS were different from the Wehrmacht. These weren't conscripts who'd been forced to fight. These were Hitler's true believers, fanatics who'd sworn personal loyalty to the Führer. Even with Germany in ruins, many SS units were still fighting, carrying out Hitler's final order to resist to the last man. When they arrived, the atmosphere in the camp changed instantly. They marched in with a strange discipline for men who'd supposedly surrendered. They stood straighter than our other prisoners, eyes forward, expressions blank. Despite their dirty uniforms and obvious fatigue, there was something unnerving about their composure. I'll never forget watching them file through the gates, 473 men, according to the final count. I did the math in my head and didn't like the result. We now had roughly 8 prisoners for every American guard. The ratio made my stomach clench. Captain Richards must have had the same thought. He ordered double watches on the towers and extra patrols along the fences. Still, resources were stretched thin. Many of our units had already been reassigned to the Pacific or sent home. My job became more critical. The SS prisoners were housed in a separate section of the camp, and I was assigned to regular patrols there. The first couple of days were uneventful. These guys were model prisoners. Too model, if you ask me. They followed every order without complaint, kept their areas meticulously clean, and maintained perfect formation during roll call. On the 3rd day after their arrival, I was making my usual rounds, pretending to check the barracks while actually listening to conversations. Most of what I heard was mundane. The same complaints about food, talk about families back home, speculation about how long they'd be held. Then I passed a group of 3 men sitting on bunks in the corner. 2 were older, probably in their 30s, with the weathered look of veterans. The 3rd was younger, maybe my age. They were speaking quietly, heads close together. Something in their posture made me slow down, pretending to inspect a nearby window latch. "Still waiting for the signal," the younger one said in German. "Patience," replied one of the older men. "Oberführer Weber said it would come. We must be ready." "It's been 3 days," the younger one persisted. "How much longer?" "As long as necessary," snapped the 3rd man. "Remember your oath." They noticed me lingering and immediately switched to talking about the poor quality of American cigarettes. But I'd heard enough. The word signal set off alarm bells, and Oberführer was a high SS rank, too high for a random POW. I finished my patrol, trying to act normal while my heart pounded in my chest. The moment my shift ended, I went straight to Captain Richards's office. Richards listened intently as I reported what I'd heard. He didn't dismiss it or tell me I was being paranoid. Instead, he immediately called in Lieutenant Coles from counterintelligence. "Tell him exactly what you told me," Richards ordered, and I repeated the conversation. Coles didn't waste time either. Within an hour, the security around the camp was quietly doubled. They brought in additional men from a nearby base and positioned them out of sight. Meanwhile, Coles asked me if I could identify the men I'd overheard. I could, and did. They were separated and taken for individual questioning. I wasn't privy to those interrogations, but the camp went into lockdown that evening. No prisoners were allowed outside their barracks, and all guards were issued additional ammunition. Around midnight, I was summoned to a makeshift command post that had been set up in the administrative building. Inside, I found Richards, Coles, and several other officers I didn't recognize, one wearing Colonel's eagles. "Private Murphy," the colonel said, "your information was correct. We've extracted a confession." One of the men I'd identified had broken during questioning. What he revealed made my blood run cold. The SS unit hadn't truly surrendered. Their commander, an Oberfuhrer Weber, had conceived a desperate plan. They would appear to give themselves up, get inside an American facility with favorable prisoner-to-guard ratios, then overwhelm the guards at a predetermined signal. They would kill the Americans, take their uniforms and weapons, and continue fighting while disguised as U.S. soldiers. Their plan had been to wait for the signal, a specific pattern of light flashes from outside the camp, then launch their attack in the pre-dawn hours when most guards would be tired. They'd identified the weak points in our security through careful observation. The attack was planned for tomorrow morning, Richards told me, his face grim. "If you hadn't caught that conversation..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I could imagine the slaughter. My fellow soldiers caught by surprise, outmanned nearly 8-1, and afterward, SS troops in American uniforms wreaking havoc behind Allied lines. They moved quickly after that. The identified ringleaders were isolated from the general population. Additional troops arrived before dawn, and the entire SS contingent was split into smaller groups and transferred to different facilities over the next 2 days. During the transfers, searchers uncovered dozens of improvised weapons, sharpened metal from food cans, bed springs fashioned into garrots, rocks wrapped in cloth to make silent bludgeons. Some had even managed to smuggle in actual knives. They'd been preparing meticulously. Outside the camp, counterintelligence teams tracked down 3 local German civilians who were to have given the signal. They found the light they would have used, a powerful flashlight with colored filters. A week later, I was called to headquarters, where Captain Richards and the colonel informed me I was being awarded the Bronze Star for my actions. I protested. I was just doing my job, just listening like I was supposed to. But Richards shook his head. "You saved hundreds of lives, son. Not just ours, but civilians too. Those bastards wouldn't have stopped with us." I never felt like a hero. I was just lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time with the right background to understand what I was hearing. Anyone else might have done the same. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been assigned to a different patrol route that day, or if I'd walked past that barracks a few minutes earlier or later. How many of my friends would have died? How many more Allied soldiers or innocent civilians might have been killed by SS men wearing American uniforms? The war in Europe was supposedly over, but I learned firsthand that surrender doesn't always mean surrender, and that the most dangerous enemy is the one who's already inside your gates. I'm 78 now, and I still wake up sometimes in a cold sweat, hearing that young SS man saying, "Waiting for the signal." 4 simple words that could have preceded a massacre. There were other incidents after the war, other close calls with Nazi holdouts and fanatics who couldn't accept defeat. But none came as close to succeeding as the plan I stumbled upon that day at Camp Eisenhower. And none left me with the same bone-deep understanding that sometimes victory and disaster are separated by nothing more than overhearing the right conversation at the right moment. Story 16. I still get chills when I think about what happened 5 years ago. I've spent countless hours in therapy trying to process it, but some wounds just don't heal right. I'm sharing this because keeping it bottled up is driving me crazy, and maybe someone out there has experienced something similar. It was late October in Leeds. I remember because the leaves were falling, and there was that distinct autumn chill in the air. I was walking home from work when my phone buzzed with a message from a name I hadn't seen in almost 10 years. Laura. Laura and I dated for about 2 years in university. She was beautiful, smart, but also intense. That's probably the kindest way to put it. She had this obsession with self-improvement that went beyond healthy. It wasn't just about being fit or successful. She was constantly joining these weird seminars and groups that promised to unlock your true potential or whatever. When we broke up, it was messy. She'd gotten involved with some group that required more and more of her time, and she changed, became secretive, paranoid. I couldn't handle it anymore. So getting her message that day was strange, to say the least. She wrote that she was back in Leeds after years abroad and wanted to catch up, said she'd changed, grown past her phase, and wanted to reconnect. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her for dinner the following evening. The restaurant she picked was this small Italian place downtown. Nice but not fancy, quiet enough for conversation. When I arrived, I almost didn't recognize her. The Laura I knew had dyed black hair, lots of makeup, and always dressed in dark clothes. This Laura had her natural brown hair, minimal makeup, and wore a simple blue dress. She looked normal, healthy. "Ishan," she smiled, standing to hug me. "It's so good to see you." The first hour went surprisingly well. We caught up on our lives, my job as a software developer, her travels through Europe and Asia. She seemed genuinely interested in what I was saying, laughing at my jokes, maintaining eye contact. The old Laura had always seemed distracted, like she was mentally calculating how each conversation could benefit her in some way. This version seemed present. Around dessert, her demeanor changed slightly. She lowered her voice and leaned in. "I need to tell you something," she said, eyes darting around the restaurant. "The reason I came back to Leeds, I've been having problems with an ex. He's been following me, showing up at places I go. The police say they can't do anything without evidence." I felt a pang of sympathy. Despite our history, nobody deserves to feel unsafe. "I'm sorry to hear that, Laura. That sounds terrifying." "It is." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Actually, I was wondering, would you mind walking me home tonight? My flat isn't far, but I'd feel safer with someone I trust." The word trust hung in the air between us. Did she really trust me after all these years? Did I trust her? Something in my gut twitched, a warning signal I ignored. "Of course," I said. "No problem." When we finished dinner, Laura insisted on paying. Outside, she asked if we could take a taxi instead of walking, saying she'd just spotted someone who looked like her ex across the street. I didn't see anyone suspicious, but it was dark and I agreed. Laura pulled out her phone and said she'd call a car service she used regularly. Within minutes, a large black van with tinted windows pulled up to the curb. "This is our ride," she said casually. I hesitated. "That's not a normal taxi. It's a private car service," she explained. "Much safer than random cabs. I've used them loads of times." Still, something felt off. The van was too big, too anonymous. But Laura was already climbing in, and I didn't want to leave her alone if she was genuinely being stalked. I followed her in. The interior was dark with bench seating along both sides. Laura sat across from me. There was a partition separating us from the driver, who I couldn't see clearly. "Thanks for doing this," Laura said as we pulled away from the curb. "It means a lot." I nodded, trying to ignore the uneasiness growing in my stomach. We'd been driving for about 5 minutes when I realized we were heading out of the city center, not toward residential areas. "Laura, where exactly is your—" Something looped around my neck from behind. I hadn't even realized someone was sitting behind me. The cord tightened instantly, cutting off my air. I clawed at it, trying to get my fingers underneath. Laura just watched, her face completely emotionless. I remember the panic more than the pain, the desperate need for air, the confusion, the betrayal in Laura's eyes as she watched me struggle. Then darkness. When I came to, I was lying on a cold floor. My hands were bound behind my back with what felt like zip ties. A gag filled my mouth, and a blindfold covered my eyes. My head throbbed. I could hear movement around me, whispered voices, then Laura's voice close to my ear. "He's awake." Someone yanked me to my feet. I tried to speak through the gag, but all that came out were muffled sounds. "Don't bother," Laura said. Her voice was different now, colder, more controlled. "You were always so trusting, Ishan. Even back then, that's why I picked you." Someone grabbed my arms and started dragging me. I could feel we were outside now, cool night air, uneven ground beneath my feet. I stumbled repeatedly as they pulled me along. The smell of damp earth and pine suggested we were in woods or a forest. I tried to focus on details, anything that might help me later if I survived this. The sound of leaves crunching, the distant hoot of an owl, anything to keep the panic at bay. After what felt like 15 minutes of walking, we stopped. I could sense open space around me, like we'd entered a clearing. The blindfold was suddenly ripped from my eyes. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. I was in a forest clearing under a full moon. Around me stood about 20 figures in dark, hooded robes, their faces obscured by ornate wooden masks carved with strange symbols. They formed a circle around a raised wooden platform. 3 men dressed in what looked like tactical gear approached me. They weren't wearing masks or robes, just all black clothing with various pouches and equipment strapped to them. They cut my clothes off until I was completely naked, then dragged me to the platform and tied me to a wooden pole at its center. One of them started methodically pouring liquid around the base of the platform. The smell of petrol was unmistakable. I was going to be burned alive. My body went cold with terror. I thrashed against my restraints, screaming into the gag. One of the men backhanded me across the face so hard I tasted blood. The hooded figures began to move, forming a tighter circle around the platform. They started chanting in a language I couldn't identify, not Latin or any European language I recognized. The sounds were guttural, rhythmic, ancient-sounding. From among them stepped a taller figure in a robe decorated with red symbols. Unlike the others, this one's mask was made of what looked like polished bone. In their hand was a flaming torch. I lost control of my bladder then. The shame of that was nothing compared to the absolute certainty that I was about to die in agony. The chanting grew louder as the leader approached the platform. I could feel the heat of the torch as they raised it overhead. The firelight reflected off the bone mask, making it look alive, grinning at me. And then, inexplicably, the leader lowered the torch and turned to the gathered crowd. They spoke a single phrase in that strange language, and the chanting stopped immediately. The leader turned back to me and studied me for what felt like forever. Then they deliberately plunged the torch into a bucket of water beside the platform. The hissing sound as the flame died seemed deafening in the sudden silence. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. I hung there, tied to the pole, shivering with cold and fear, completely confused. The leader raised their hand and made a gesture. Immediately, the blindfold was replaced over my eyes. I was cut from the pole and dragged back through the forest. This time, I was too shocked to keep track of directions or distances. I was bundled back into what I assumed was the same van. We drove for what felt like hours. Nobody spoke. I kept waiting for someone to kill me, wondering if this was just a more private location for my execution. When the van finally stopped, I was pulled out and pushed to my knees. I felt someone cut the zip ties on my wrists. Then the van door slammed, and I heard it drive away. I ripped off the blindfold and gag. I was alone, completely naked, on a remote country road. It was still night, but dawn was approaching. I had no idea where I was, no phone, no money, nothing. I walked for about an hour before I found a cottage with lights on. An older couple answered my desperate knocking. They looked horrified at the naked, bruised man on their doorstep, but they let me in, gave me clothes, and called the police. The police investigation went nowhere. They found no physical evidence at the location where I was abandoned. Laura had apparently checked out of her hotel the morning before our dinner, leaving no forwarding address. The restaurant confirmed we'd been there, but their CCTV didn't cover the street where the van picked us up. I couldn't provide any useful details about the van. No license plate, no identifying marks. The wooded area I described matched several locations within driving distance of Leeds. Without knowing how long I'd been unconscious or how far we'd driven, it was impossible to narrow it down. They found nothing at any of them. No platform, no evidence of a gathering, nothing. I spent weeks in therapy, diagnosed with PTSD and severe anxiety. I moved away from Leeds, changed my name, deleted all social media. I've never heard from Laura again. 5 years later, I still have nightmares nearly every night. I can't form relationships because I can't trust anyone. I jump at shadows and sleep with the lights on. But the question that haunts me most is, why didn't they kill me? Why go through all that preparation, that ritual, only to stop at the last moment? What did the leaders see when they looked at me? Sometimes I wonder if it would have been better if they'd just finished the job. Because now I live in constant fear that one day I'll look up and see a bone mask watching me from across the street, and this time they won't change their minds. Story 17. I still can't believe it's been 5 years since that day at Pineville Park. I've tried to put it behind me, but sometimes when I'm alone, the memory comes rushing back and my heart starts racing all over again. I guess writing this might help me process what happened, even after all this time. It was a Wednesday afternoon in October, unseasonably warm for fall. I remember because I'd taken off my hoodie about 10 minutes into my practice and was just wearing my Pineville High basketball shorts and a t-shirt. Senior year was stressing me out. College applications, maintaining my GPA, and trying to impress scouts for a potential basketball scholarship. That's why I was at the park courts instead of the school gym that day. Coach had been riding me hard about my three-point shot, and I just wanted some space to practice without anyone watching or criticizing. Pineville Park isn't anything special, just too faded. Courts with chain nets that the city rarely replaces, surrounded by some patchy grass and trees. But it was empty that afternoon, which was exactly what I needed. The school courts were always packed after classes ended, and I just wanted to be alone with my thoughts and my basketball. I'd been shooting for maybe 20 minutes, getting into a good rhythm. The sun was starting to lower, but it was still plenty bright out, maybe around 4:30 or 5 o'clock. I remember being in that zone where your mind goes quiet and your body just takes over. Dribble, position, shoot, dribble, position, shoot. It was peaceful. Then I heard car engines, which wasn't unusual for the park. People pulled in and out of the lot all the time. Without really breaking my concentration, I glanced over and saw two cars entering the parking area. One was a dark blue sedan, maybe a Honda or Toyota, nothing flashy, and the other was a black SUV, older model with tinted windows. I didn't think much of it until I noticed how they were parking. The blue sedan pulled in really close to the courts, like awkwardly close, when there were plenty of normal spots available. But what really caught my attention was the SUV. The driver didn't even bother with a parking space. They just drove right onto the edge of the basketball court itself, which made no sense. Who does that? Something in my gut tightened. I tried to ignore it and kept shooting, but I couldn't help stealing glances at the vehicles. For several minutes, nobody got out. They just sat there with their engines off. I remember thinking maybe they were waiting for someone or just talking on their phones before heading into the park. I missed my next shot, and as I jogged to retrieve the ball, I noticed movement from both cars. The doors opened simultaneously, like they'd coordinated it. Two men stepped out, one from each car. Both had long hair that reached past their shoulders. One had dark hair, maybe black or dark brown, and the other had this dirty blonde color. Both wore sunglasses, even though the sun wasn't that bright anymore. They weren't dressed in anything remarkable, just jeans and dark jackets, but something about them immediately felt wrong. I grabbed my ball and stood at the free throw line, watching them approach. They walked with purpose, not casually like normal park visitors. They weren't carrying anything, no gym bags, no sports equipment, nothing that would explain why they were at a park. My heart started beating faster, but I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe they were just going to ask if they could join or if I'd seen someone they were meeting. But they weren't smiling. They weren't making any of those small social gestures people make when they're about to have a normal interaction. They came right up to me, stopping about 6 feet away, positioned so that they were somewhat blocking the most direct route back to the parking lot. The dark-haired one spoke first. "Hey, we need you to come with us." His voice was flat, emotionless. No introduction, no explanation, no friendly preamble, just a demand from a complete stranger. "What?" I asked, holding my basketball against my hip, trying to sound casual despite the alarm bells going off in my head. "Get in the car, now." The blonde one gestured toward the SUV. "Don't make this difficult." My mouth went dry. "I don't know you guys. I'm just practicing." The dark-haired one took a step closer. "Look, you can walk to the car, or we can make you. Your choice, but it's happening." They both shifted their stances slightly, and I could see the blonde one reaching into his jacket pocket. That's when I knew this was seriously bad. These weren't just weird guys, they were trying to abduct me in broad daylight. Time seemed to slow down. I remember thinking about my options with a strange clarity. The park was empty, no witnesses. If I screamed, would anyone hear me from the nearest houses? Probably not. Could I fight both of them? I was in good shape from basketball, but they were grown men, possibly armed. Running seemed like my only chance. I still had my basketball in my hands. Without really planning it, I suddenly stepped forward like I was going to go with them, then threw the ball as hard as I could at the space between them. It wasn't aimed at either one specifically. I just wanted to create a distraction. The ball bounced hard between them, causing both to flinch and step aside. In that split second, I pivoted and sprinted toward the trees that lined the far side of the court, away from where they'd positioned themselves and away from their cars. I heard one of them swear and then footsteps pounding after me. I didn't look back. I just ran faster than I ever had in my life. I was a point guard on our basketball team, known for my speed, and in that moment I was grateful for every sprint drill coach had ever put us through. The adrenaline coursing through me was intense. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I remember the sound of my shoes slapping against the pavement, then crunching through fallen leaves as I hit the tree line. There was a narrow dirt path that led through the small wooded area to a residential street on the other side. I'd taken this shortcut countless times after practice, but never at a full sprint. Branches whipped at my arms. I nearly tripped on an exposed root, but somehow kept my balance. I could still hear them behind me, but their footsteps sounded farther away. They were falling behind. I burst out of the trees onto Maple Street, a quiet residential road lined with small, well-kept homes. I didn't stop. I cut across someone's front yard and zigzagged through the neighborhood, taking random turns, jumping fences between backyards, anything to throw them off my trail. After maybe 10 minutes of this, when my lungs were burning and my legs felt like rubber, I finally slowed down enough to glance behind me. I couldn't see or hear them anymore. I had no idea if they'd given up or if they were still searching the area in their cars. I ducked behind a shed in someone's backyard and just sat there for a while, trying to catch my breath without making noise. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I realized I'd left my hoodie and my phone at the court. My basketball too, but that seemed like the least of my concerns. Without my phone, I couldn't call for help. I considered knocking on someone's door, but what if the men were driving around looking for me? What if they saw me approach a house and then waited for me to come out? After what felt like forever but was probably 15 minutes, I decided I needed to get home. My house was about 2 miles from where I was, and I would have to be careful the whole way. I stayed off main roads, cutting through yards and keeping to areas with trees or fences where I could duck out of sight if I needed to. Every car that drove past made my heart rate spike. I kept thinking I saw their vehicles everywhere. A blue sedan would drive by and I'd freeze, pressed against a fence or crouched behind bushes, only to realize it wasn't the same car. The entire way home, I kept checking over my shoulder, convinced they were right behind me. It took me over an hour to make a trip that should have taken 30 minutes. When I finally saw my house, I almost cried with relief. I did one last check of the street to make sure none of the parked cars matched what I'd seen at the park, then made a dash for my front door. My mom was in the kitchen when I burst in, looking panicked and sweaty. She immediately knew something was wrong. I told her everything, stumbling over my words. She called the police right away. 2 officers came to take my statement, but I could tell they weren't taking it as seriously as they should have. They kept asking if I was sure the men had actually threatened me, suggesting maybe I'd misunderstood their intentions. The police did drive me back to the park to look for my things. But everything was gone. My hoodie, my phone, and my basketball. There was no evidence that anything had happened. No witnesses. Just my word. The next day at school, rumors had already started spreading. Some people believed me, but others thought I was making it up for attention. A few even joked that I'd hallucinated the whole thing. Only my closest friends seemed to take it seriously. My parents filed a police report, but nothing ever came of it. The officers said they'd keep an eye out for the vehicles I described, but without license plate numbers or better descriptions of the men, there wasn't much they could do. I never went back to Pineville Park alone. I never practiced there again. For months afterward, I jumped at every car that resembled the ones from that day. I'd see a man with long hair in a store, and my heart would race until I confirmed it wasn't one of them. It's been 5 years, and I still don't know who those men were or what they wanted with me. Were they human traffickers, kidnappers? Was I specifically targeted or just in the wrong place at the wrong time? I've come up with countless theories, but none of them explain everything. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't thrown that basketball, if I hadn't been fast enough to outrun them. The thought makes me sick to my stomach. I know some people still don't believe me or think I exaggerated what happened, but I know what I experienced. Those men were there to take me, and they nearly succeeded in broad daylight at a public park I'd been to hundreds of times. I still play basketball. I even got that scholarship I was working toward, but I'm constantly aware of my surroundings now. I never practice alone in isolated areas. I carry pepper spray. I check the back seat of my car before getting in. 5 years later, and I still look over my shoulder when I hear a car pulling up nearby. I still flinch when I see men who resemble the ones from that day. Maybe someday I'll see a news story about arrests that connect to what happened to me. But until then, I'll never know why they targeted me or if they're still out there, waiting for another opportunity, another kid alone in a park. Story 18. Then came that night in December. I'd gone to bed around 11 after binging some shows on Netflix. I remember it was a Thursday because I had an early meeting the next day and I'd set my alarm for 6. I'd been asleep for maybe 3 hours when this loud, aggressive banging jolted me awake. Bang, bang, bang. My heart was instantly racing. It took me a second to process what was happening. Someone was pounding on my front door. I checked my phone, 2:16 in the morning. Who the hell would be at my door at that hour? Bang, bang, bang. The pounding continued, hard enough that I could feel it vibrating through the house. This wasn't a friendly knock. Whoever was out there was hitting my door with their fist like they were trying to break it down. I live alone, so there was no one else to deal with this. I got out of bed, grabbed my phone, already dialing 911 in my head if needed, and crept down the hallway toward the front door. My house isn't that big, so it only took about 15 seconds to get there, but the whole time I was going through possibilities. Drunk person at wrong house, emergency with a neighbor, break-in attempt. The banging was so loud when I reached the living room that I could feel it in my chest. But the second, and I mean the very second, I reached for the porch light switch, it stopped. Complete silence. Like whoever was out there knew exactly where I was standing. I flipped on the porch light and looked through the peephole. Nothing. Just my empty porch and driveway beyond. I waited about 30 seconds, listening, before cautiously opening the door a crack, with the chain still on. Empty. No one was there. I unlatched the chain and stepped out onto my porch. The December air hit me immediately. It was maybe 35 degrees and I was just wearing boxers and a t-shirt. I looked up and down the street. No car driving away, no person walking off, absolutely nothing. It was like whoever had been pounding on my door had just vanished. After checking around the sides of the house and finding nothing, I went back inside, locked up, and double-checked all the windows. I was fully awake now, adrenaline pumping. I sat in my living room for about an hour, watching out the windows, before finally convincing myself it must have been some drunk college kid at the wrong house who realized their mistake and ran off. I had that early meeting, so I finally went back to bed around 3:30, but barely slept. I was exhausted the next day at work, and by evening I'd almost convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. Just one of those weird things that happen sometimes when you live alone. Then the second night happened. I'd been hesitant to go to bed, still a little spooked from the night before, but nothing weird had happened all day. I finally turned in around midnight, leaving a light on in the hallway like a nervous kid. The honking started at 1:48. I remember looking at my clock the moment it woke me up. Honk, honk, honk. Long, deliberate honks, maybe 5 seconds each, with just a few seconds between them. Not like someone accidentally bumping a horn. This was intentional. I jumped out of bed, heart immediately in my throat. This couldn't be a coincidence. Not 2 nights in a row. I went to my front window, which faces the driveway, and pulled back the curtain. There was a dark sedan sitting in my driveway, just sitting there, lights off, repeatedly blaring its horn. It looked like maybe a Toyota or Honda, nothing distinctive except for a small dent in the rear fender that was visible in the streetlight. Honk, honk. I couldn't see the driver clearly through the windshield, just the outline of someone sitting behind the wheel. They were just sitting there, laying on the horn, staring at my house. I grabbed my phone and took a photo, though it didn't come out very clear in the dark. I debated calling the police right then, but something made me want to confront whoever this was. I was pissed off now, not just scared. Who does this 2 nights in a row? I turned on my porch light and front lights, then went to the door. The honking continued the whole time. I unlocked the door, opened it, and stepped onto the porch. The honking stopped instantly. The car's headlights flashed on, nearly blinding me, and before I could even shout anything, the car reversed out of my driveway so fast that the tires squealed. It took off down the street at high speed. I couldn't get the license plate. It happened too fast, and the sudden headlights had ruined my night vision. By the time I could see properly again, the car was gone. I went back inside, locked up, and immediately called the non-emergency police line. They took my report, but didn't sound particularly concerned. "Probably just kids messing around," the officer said. "We'll have a patrol car drive by a few times tonight." I didn't sleep much after that. I sat in my living room with all the lights on until dawn, jumping at every sound outside. When morning finally came, I was exhausted but relieved. I had to go to work, but first I needed coffee badly. I opened my front door to head out, and that's when I saw it. A folded piece of paper taped to my door. My heart nearly stopped as I pulled it off. Inside was a handwritten note in blue ballpoint pen. "I will be back next week." No signature, no explanation, just those 6 words in messy handwriting. I called the police immediately. They sent an officer over who took the note as evidence and asked a bunch of questions I couldn't answer. Who would want to harass me? Had I had any recent breakups, arguments with coworkers, road rage, incidents? Nobody came to mind. I'm pretty boring, honestly. I go to work, come home, watch Netflix, repeat. The officer suggested I stay somewhere else for a few days, but I didn't want to be driven from my own home. Instead, I installed new deadbolts that afternoon and ordered a security camera system online with expedited shipping. The next week was the longest of my life. I barely slept. Every car that drove by, every noise in the night had me jumping up to check the windows. I took time off work because I couldn't concentrate. The security cameras arrived and I installed them the same day, covering every approach to the house. The next week from the note came and went. Nothing happened. No banging, no honking, no notes, nothing on my security cameras. I waited another week, still on edge, still nothing. After a month of nothing happening, I started to relax a little. Maybe they'd gotten bored with terrorizing me. Maybe it was just a stupid prank that had run its course. But then I started noticing little things. A garden gnome I keep by my front steps would be facing a different direction when I got home from work. My garbage cans would be arranged differently than how I left them. Once I could swear that a kitchen chair had been moved slightly. Nothing I could prove, nothing worth calling the police about, but enough to make me wonder if someone was still messing with me, just more subtly now. The police eventually closed my case due to lack of evidence or further incidents. The note didn't have any usable fingerprints, and without a license plate for the car, there wasn't much they could do. It's been over a year now, and I still don't know who was banging on my door that night, or who was honking in my driveway, or who left that note. I've installed more security measures, motion sensor lights, better cameras, even an alarm system. I've never seen that car again. But sometimes I'll wake up at 2 in the morning for no reason, my heart racing, thinking I heard banging on my door. And I'll lie there, listening, wondering if tonight's the night they finally come back. The worst part is not knowing why. Was it random? Was it mistaken identity? Or did someone specifically target me for some reason I can't figure out? I still live in the same house. I've thought about moving, but why should I uproot my whole life because of some sick joke? Besides, what if they followed me? What if they're still watching me? Sometimes when I'm driving home from work, I find myself checking my rearview mirror more than usual, looking for a dark sedan with a dent in the rear fender. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel completely safe in my own home again. And sometimes I think maybe they never left at all.